American Comics. My Warhammer Simulator Chapter 926. Past Events on Caliban, Time Remnants Part 6. Caliban, Northern Wilds. The biting cold wind swept across the tattered corpses of the serious knights. The massive walls of St. Grula Fortress were covered with terrifying marks left by cannon fire and trebuchets. And in the cratered ground below the fortress, large numbers of bodies, weapons, and armor belonging to the Order of Knights were being collected and recycled by teams of mortal servants. This was the final battle of the Forest Children's conquest of the Caliban world, and also the last stage of Lionel Johnson's beast hunt. Thump, thump, thump. An armored giant, approximately 4 meters tall, stepped out of the warm camp. He looked up at the dim sky and subconsciously murmured, "It looks like it's going to snow. This isn't a good sign for the upcoming siege." At this moment, Lionel Johnson, with his golden hair draped over his shoulders, turned his head and scanned the seemingly endless night camp, as well as the elite combat knights moving back and forth within the camp. He subconsciously raised his massive hand, encased in thick metal, and rubbed the metal 10 rings on his stout arm. Perhaps the upcoming siege would require him, the Grand Master, to personally take action and achieve a swift victory to avoid prolonged delays. Thump, thump, thump. Just then, a middle-aged man, about 2 meters tall, quickly approached Lionel Johnson. He first scrutinized Lionel Johnson's incredibly burly physique from head to toe, then looked up and said, "Lionel Johnson, a small knight squad stationed at the edge of Caliban Forest unexpectedly encountered a mist incursion. If our intelligence information is not flawed, your Primarch brothers, whom you often mention, seem to have appeared once again." The middle-aged man's words had barely fallen. Lionel Johnson, who was contemplating how to conduct the siege, immediately focused his gaze on the other man's face. "Father, are you sure? In previous mist incursions, there have been complete, Luo Shahs. If I hadn't personally intervened back then, I'm afraid the sacrifice of hundreds of combat knights would not have been enough." Luther, who heard Lionel Johnson's words, nodded slightly and said in a deep voice, "I still trust the intelligence information conveyed by the knights. Furthermore, Zahariel has already gone to meet your Primarch brothers. At the latest, they will arrive at the camp tomorrow morning, and then we will know the truth. Speaking of which, how do you plan to face your Primarch brothers? These years of mist incursions have caused great trouble and threat to Caliban. I can consider this a natural phenomenon like a disaster, but others may not agree with this idea." At this moment, Lionel Johnson, whose face showed no emotional fluctuations, suddenly stared at the shadowy St. Grula fortress in front of him. He said without hesitation, "Since he is my brother, then he must share my worries. And once this grand beast hunt ends in victory, no one will care about this matter anymore." Boom, boom, boom. Luo Shah, wearing vibranium power armor, personally drove a hoverbike above the cold ground. The wolf cub, subconsciously grinning, sat behind the hoverbike, constantly feeling the biting cold wind in his face. At the same time, several members of the Order of Knights riding huge mounts were left far behind by the two. The white mist repeatedly exhaled from the mouths and noses of everyone, and their mounts almost condensed into a continuous, striking trail in the air. If Luo Shah hadn't genuinely not known the correct route, they would have long since left the Order of Knights and sped off on their own. Soon after, Luo Shah and his companions, who were moving quickly, met a group of Order of Knights members who were waiting for them. A supplicant knight named Zahariel first stared at Luo Shah's appearance in great shock, and then the other party stated that they were the team sent by Lionel Johnson to welcome the Primarch. Luo Shah and the wolf cub were not surprised by this. They continued to drive the hoverbike, led by Zahariel and the others, and arrived inside a vast large camp. After Luo Shah and the wolf cub drove their vibranium power armor into a huge tent, the two immediately saw the massive figure sitting behind the war table. At this moment, Luo Shah, subconsciously narrowing his eyes, first looked at the middle-aged man standing to the side. If he hadn't mistaken him, he should be Lionel Johnson's adoptive father and teacher, the head of the fallen angel of the First Legion, and the instigator of all future Legion disasters, Luther. How should I address you? Brother or Luo Sha? Perhaps you don't know, the mist incursion has brought Caliban far more than just the casualties seen on the surface. You must be responsible for this. Just then, Lionel Johnson, with an indifferent expression, spoke first. And after Luo Sha and the wolf cub heard his words, they exchanged glances. Luo Sha, driving his vibranium power armor, stepped forward. He looked at Lionel Johnson, who already possessed the aura of a Primarch, and said, "Brother, our purpose in coming here is to eliminate the great threat posed by the mist incursion. In fact, we are also completely at a loss about those things called time remnants. If you have any specific information, could you share it with us?" Luo Sha's words had barely fallen. Lionel Johnson, who was originally sitting behind the war table, slowly stood up. He looked directly into Luo Sha's eyes, which showed genuine emotion, and said in a deep voice, "We have indeed gained more information about the mist incursion at the cost of countless mortal and even night lives, but this intelligence will not be easily provided to you, even if you are my blood brother. If you want to obtain this important intelligence, then lead my knights to conquer Saint Grula Fortress. After this war is won, I will personally tell you all the secrets." At this moment, Luo Sha expressed no opinion on Lionel Johnson's demand. If the previous two meetings were not counted, this was his first verbal exchange with a rational Lionel Johnson. The emotional foundation and trust between them were far from being that of old friends meeting again. Moreover, he had long heard about Lionel Johnson's temper and personality. However, the wolf cub, frowning slightly, drove his vibranium power armor forward. He grinned and said to Lionel Johnson, "You should know what kind of disaster Caliban will face without our strong help. Not only do you not provide assistance, but you order us to do things for you. Don't you think that's too much?" Lionel Johnson, hearing the wolf cub's words, slowly moved his heavy steps. He went directly in front of the wolf cub, and with a physique far exceeding his, he looked down at the wolf cub and said indifferently, "Either you choose to besiege and obtain intelligence, or you choose to get out of my camp. Other than that, you have no other path. Thank you all for your support." Seeing that the wolf cub and Lionel Johnson seemed to be at odds, Luo Sha took the initiative to step forward and ease the seemingly imminent conflict between them. In fact, in Luo Sha's opinion, a siege battle from the age of gunpowder weapons was simply not worth mentioning for him and the wolf cub. If the time was right, he alone could slaughter the entire Saint Grula fortress, ensuring no one survived. After the furious wolf cub was pulled out of Lionel Johnson's massive tent by Luo Sha, he took a deep breath and suddenly turned to the calm Luo Sha, saying, "I thought the ancient historical records of the Space Wolves had exaggerated their negative descriptions of Lionel Johnson, but now it seems he really is an arrogant and cold-hearted tyrant. Be patient. Cypher's whereabouts are unknown, and we are in need of assistance. But truthfully, in my past experiences, besides those truly incorrigible traitors, this is the first time I've encountered a Primarch who treats a Primarch brothers like me in such a manner. Perhaps some fundamental behaviors within the First Legion are indeed influenced by Lionel Johnson himself. No wonder the inner circle, a special situation, would appear in the future." Luo Sha, subconsciously narrowing his eyes, shook his head slightly and spoke calmly. The wolf cub, looking up at the dim sky, fell silent. Luo Sha, scanning the camp back and forth, also remained silent. Soon after, a night squad, under Lionel Johnson's command, came to lead Luo Sha and the wolf cub deeper into the sprawling camp. Throughout the entire night, Luo Sha and the wolf cub met with many battle knights preparing to participate in the siege war, getting to know each other. However, Luo Sha also vaguely sensed that many battle knights harbored hidden anger towards them. And according to Luo Sha's understanding, the countless mist invasions over the years had become an even greater threat to the people of Caliban than the Caliban beast. Almost everyone had lost family and friends in one mist invasion after another. And those time remnants, occasionally bearing Luo Sha's face, naturally became one of the most hated targets of the Caliban people. Otherwise, the mist invasions wouldn't have been jokingly referred to as Luo Sha's trouble, within the Order of Knights. Facing this situation, Luo Sha's thoughts rapidly spun, and he seemed to vaguely understand Lionel Johnson's intention in having him execute this siege war. While it might not completely resolve the issue of the countless Caliban people's hatred, at least a victorious Luo Sha wouldn't have to worry about anyone inciting the Caliban people. Woo woo woo. As the sky gradually brightened, a biting cold wind, carrying a large amount of snowflakes, fell upon the northern wilderness of Caliban. The massive walls of St. Grula Fortress had already been covered with countless crystal clear, thick layers of ice by the serious knights. If Luo Sha and the Wolf Cub hadn't unexpectedly joined this siege battle, then for Lionel Johnson's Order of Knights, this would undoubtedly be an extremely tough war. Thump thump thump. Not long after, under the silent gaze of Lionel Johnson and Luther, tens of thousands of battle knights advanced slowly in unison against the swirling snow. The Wolf Cub, wielding the Breaker Warhammer, and Luo Sha, clutching the Blood Scythe, also drove their vibranium power armor to the front of the massive battle formation. At this moment, Luo Sha and the Wolf Cub exchanged glances, then nodded to each other. Buzz buzz buzz. The next second, tendrils of pitch-black shadow gradually condensed around his enormous body. Then, Luo Sha rapidly transformed into a massive, sky-obscuring storm of crows, sweeping towards St. Grula Fortress. Boom! At the same time, hundreds of large cannons and giant catapults also powerfully launched their devastating shells and stones towards the towering St. Grula Fortress. In an instant, countless fragments of thick ice and giant wall remnants continuously fell, producing deafening roars. Seeing that Luo Sha's storm of crows had already churned most of the mortal knights on top of the giant wall into a sky full of flying flesh and blood debris, the Wolf Cub, raising his Breaker Warhammer with all his might, couldn't help but let out a sky-shattering roar. He immediately drove his vibranium power armor, charging madly towards the fortress walls. In fact, a Primarch whose combat power far surpassed countless mortals, and an Astartes who was also a Khorne champion, personally entering the fray, undoubtedly brought an invincible combat morale to all the battle knights. Many battle knights suddenly raised the great swords clutched in their hands. They followed the Wolf Cub's charge, launching wave after wave of frenzied attacks on St. Grula Fortress. Meanwhile, Lionel Johnson, rapidly observing the battlefield situation, subtly revealed a relieved smile at the corner of his mouth, and as he heavily waved a large hand at a messenger knight. Tens of seconds later, booming roars of battle knights launching siege attacks also continuously erupted from other directions of St. Grula Fortress. Considering this, did Lionel Johnson really stake the victory of this siege war entirely on Luo Sha, his Primarch brothers? Not necessarily. As time passed, this final conquest battle on the world of Caliban quickly drew to a close. Even though the heavily damaged Sirius Knights had to release a large number of pre-captured Caliban beasts to try and slow down the fierce offensive of countless battle knights. But facing the Wolf Cub, who was almost invincible in close combat, and Luo Sha, who was releasing shadow clone after shadow clone, even an Astartes battle group on the opposing side might not have been able to hold out for long. However, just as everyone on the battlefield, even Lionel Johnson and Luther, believed that the siege war was already settled. Countless strange mists, interwoven with black and white, rapidly rose from the many ruins of St. Grula Fortress. All units, prepare. It's a mist invasion. As piercing, massive roars echoed throughout the entire battlefield. A terrifying time remnants, whose sheer size was comparable to a warhound titan, and whose overall form seemed to be forged from countless fragmented heads and flesh and blood remnants that once belonged to Luo Sha, suddenly shook its countless twisted limbs and burst out from the deeper parts of the strange mist. By Russ, what the hell is that? The Wolf Cub, unable to help but widen his eyes, subconsciously braked his magnetic boots. He suddenly turned his head towards Luo Sha and roared loudly. Primarch, hurry. I swear a chaos spawn looks better than this thing, let's kill it together. Thank you all for your support. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Luo Sha, with tendrils of dark shadow rapidly returning into his massive body, almost immediately spotted the time remnants, comparable in size to a Warhound Titan. Even he hadn't anticipated such an astonishing situation from the so-called time remnants. At this moment, Luo Sha, whose giant palm instinctively tightened around the blood scythe, immediately issued a warning to those around him. He constantly signaled the battle knights of the Order of Knights to retreat immediately to reduce casualties and sacrifices. One should know that time remnants could not only immune psychic attacks but also possessed extremely terrifying resistance to physical attacks. Even if all the battle knights present were replaced with Astartes, they might not achieve much in a direct confrontation. However, Luo Sha's warning seemed to have no effect. Teams of battle knights quickly completed their formation, then, under the command of sharp orders, charged towards the colossal time remnants. A large number of previously silenced cannons and boulders also swept in with terrifying roars, striking heavily towards the time remnants. Boom, boom, boom. Just then, a massive figure clad in heavy armor arrived beside Luo Sha, treading through the swirling snow. Luo Sha sensed his arrival immediately, without even turning his gaze. This large fused monster before us, or what you call time remnants, is not common. Based on the countless experiences we've accumulated over a decade, the disaster level of the Mist invasion is tentatively divided into 4 tiers, Lionel Johnson said slowly to Luo Sha, his expression solemn, as he faced the biting wind and snow. The first tier, individual entities with missing limbs. A battle-hardened squad of battle knights is sufficient to deal with them. This is also the most common type of disturbance caused by Mist invasions. The second tier, individual entities appearing in plural form. Apart from occasional missing limbs, their facial features are relatively intact, but their number generally does not exceed 13. It requires more than 10 battle squads to form a combat formation to eliminate them. This has occurred 9 times over the years. The third tier, the large fused entities we are currently seeing. These require at least 1,000 battle knights to barely contend with. They have only appeared 3 times so far, but each appearance has resulted in massive casualties. However, this is nothing compared to the 4th tier of Mist invasion. The 4th tier has only one complete, independent entity. In fact, this time remnants, aside from not being able to speak, is not much different from your current state. The only difference is that the opponent has no humanity whatsoever, with killing and eliminating all life as its primary goal, unable to communicate and utterly unreasonable. This level of time remnants has only appeared once. After more than a dozen Caliban human settlements were completely destroyed, I personally cut down the opponent. Lionel Johnson's deep voice echoed in Luo Sha's ears. He hadn't even had time to ask. Significant and tragic casualties had already occurred on the battlefield where the large time remnants were being confronted head-on. The massive time remnants, with countless lower limbs treading back and forth on the snow, merely executed a violent roll and pounce. Hundreds of battle knights who couldn't dodge were instantly turned into scattered bloody remains, leaving extremely glaring crimson stains on the cold, white ground. And with the heavy thud of 2 magnetic boots stomping on the ground. The wolf cub, gripping the breaker warhammer in his single arm, charged towards the large time remnants like a human tank, driving his vibranium power armor. His massive body, imbued with terrifyingly bloody momentum and impact force, heavily collided with the colossal body of the large time remnants. The breaker warhammer, swept out from his palm, continuously shattered numerous twisted lower limbs, forcing the entire large time remnants to stagger. Boom, boom, boom. Just then, Luo Sha took a deep breath and immediately propelled his vibranium power armor to charge towards the large time remnants. And Lionel Johnson, standing beside him, instinctively shook his head and drew the giant greatsword, forged from vibranium, from his waist. Then, his 2 massive feet stomped hard on the cold ground, and his entire colossal body charged forward with incredible speed. The next moment, the blood scythe held tightly in Luo Sha's palm was wielded into green light wheels, indistinguishable to the naked eye. The sharp blade continuously cut across the terrifying surface of the large time remnant's body, rapidly slicing off the twisted heads, each bearing Luo Sha's likeness. At the same time, with a buzzing sound that echoed through the air. Metal 10 rings, suffused with purple light, suddenly streaked through the cold air, almost instantly piercing and breaking more of the large time remnant's lower limbs, causing the unsupported opponent to collapse heavily onto the cold, snowy ground. Rumble. And after the large time remnants had completely fallen, a large number of battle knights wielding melee weapons quickly followed Luo Sha and Lionel Johnson, and others, rapidly moving forward to gradually destroy the large time remnants, which could only flail its broken limbs in place. Soon after, the eerie mist that had almost enveloped half the battlefield gradually thinned. And the large time remnants, having just endured countless melee attacks, seemed to reach a certain limit and had to rapidly dissipate into the cold air. If I'm not mistaken, based on vague past experiences, once the time remnants are successfully eliminated, the time I and the wolf cub can remain here is limited. I vaguely suspect that these time remnants are a byproduct of my long-term use of a certain special power. And the true source of this idea is the power residue theory you spoke of to appease the mortal knights. Even if it was just a bold guess of yours, it gave me significant inspiration, Luo Sha said, slow wisps of white mist escaping from his mouth and nose, as he gazed at the dissipating large time remnants. He turned his head and slowly said to Lionel Johnson, whose massive body stood firm on the snow, Lionel Johnson, perhaps you've already realized, or perhaps not, that we too are actually from a future timeline. These time remnants should not have appeared on your world of Caliban. I don't know how much this situation will affect you personally, and there isn't much I can tell you right now. If nothing unexpected happens, you will soon meet the current emperor and become one of the gene seed primarchs of the human empire. You will acquire a group of your own bloodline descendants and embark on a difficult path called the Great Crusade. You will have more brothers, enemies, and beliefs to fight for. You and I will meet again. By then, perhaps communication and interaction between us will be easier. And the only advice I can give you right now is, beware of Luther. Thank you for your support. Just as Luo Sha solemnly instructed Lionel Johnson on some important matters. As he had predicted, the long-awaited sensation of painful tearing swept over him once more. The only difference was that this time, the wolf cub also found himself in the same predicament. He endured the extremely unstable temporal displacement alongside Luo Sha. Rumble. However, not long after, when Luo Sha and the wolf cub, enduring the lingering pain, quickly activated their vibranium power armor, intending to survey their surroundings. They instinctively widened their eyes and first saw that, in the pitch-black night sky, massive fleets engaged in fierce combat outside the cold void illuminated the entire planet's atmosphere with their dazzling light spears. At the same time, countless heavy artillery shells and whirlwind missiles, streaking across the sky like a meteor shower, rained down upon the smoke-filled ground positions. Amidst Crusader-class land raiders, some burning fiercely and others charging forward. Dark angels, clad in black power armor with blood-red insignia emblazoned on their thick shoulder pads, were engaged in extremely brutal close-quarters combat against each other. In that moment, countless comrades who had once fought side by side clashed with bolters, and blood-bound brothers, once intimately close, faced each other with chainswords. Boom, boom, boom. Facing such an intense and chaotic battlefield, Luo Sha and the wolf cub, their brows furrowed, did not immediately intervene. They were still trying to discern which dark angels were loyalists and which were traitors. However, at this moment, with a roaring engine sound approaching from a distance, a screaming vengeance land speeder quickly hovered above Luo Sha and the others. The next second, Lord Cypher, still bearing his lion sword on his back and clad in dark green power armor, heavily landed within the sight of the other two. Primarch and Wolf Cub, why are you only just arriving now? Quick, follow me. This isn't our battlefield, and there are more urgent situations elsewhere. As soon as Cypher's words fell, Luo Sha, instinctively twitching his nose, suddenly raised a hand to stop the wolf cub, who was about to step forward. He coldly scanned Cypher in the distance and asked with a solemn tone. Cypher, you seem to have a strong scent of chaos psychic power clinging to you. Would you care to explain what you've been in contact with? At this moment, seeing Luo Sha and the wolf cub, their expressions grave, instinctively gripping their blood scythe and breaker warhammer. Cypher immediately raised his hand and pulled back his hood, revealing a resolute face clearly showing anxiety. He said to his brothers in a deep voice, "I have already learned most of the truth and secrets involving the time remnants. And my specific source of information was a Tzeentch greater demon. Don't worry, I've used verbal traps to verify the specific content's authenticity. The so-called time remnants are indeed a kind of overflow phenomenon caused by the Primarch's own warp essence being overly active, but not the current Primarch, rather a more powerful Primarch from a future stage. And even the Tzeentch greater demon had to admit that the Chaos Gods also played a role in fanning the flames. However, from the current situation, it seems the Chaos Gods' schemes have backfired, so severely that they have to find a way to drag the Emperor and us into temporal displacement to patch the holes. Caliban, at this very moment, is the most fragile and important temporal node in the entire galactic history. And deep beneath the world of Caliban, a temporal portal, forcibly torn open by mysterious power, is continuously raging, with large amounts of time remnants constantly gushing out. At the same time, countless demonic legions from the Chaos Gods are desperately resisting the invasion of the time remnants. Yes, you heard correctly, the Chaos forces are resisting the time remnants, because according to a series of prophecies from the Master of Plans, if the temporal portal on Caliban is not completely closed, then not only will the future of the entire galaxy undergo massive changes that even the Chaos Gods cannot predict, but the past, which has already become fixed, will also be completely destroyed by the endless time remnants, ultimately leading to the real universe potentially suffering a destructive structural collapse that even the warp cannot withstand. At this moment, Cypher's low words plunged Luo Sha and the wolf cub into silence. The terrifying artillery fire booming in the night sky seemed to replace their heartbeats, becoming a continuous series of impassioned symphonies. Just then, Luo Sha, his expression fluctuating on his bronzed face, suddenly spoke towards Cypher. "I once told the Emperor that if my future self believes everything has become a foregone conclusion, and when the human empire has completely embarked on a hopeless dead end, I will do everything in my power to drag the entire universe down with me. Perhaps this is the only message my future self wants to convey to us. So why should I help you, or even the Chaos Gods, prevent the destruction of the entire universe? Isn't this the end that the chaos in the warp has always desired? Since the Chaos Gods are so fond of fire, then they shouldn't be afraid of the fire burning them." Luo Sha's low words echoed in the ears of those present. The wolf cub, narrowing his eyes, first gazed at the Primarch's indifferent expression, then scanned Cypher's grave face. He did not make any outrageous moves, as if the destruction of the universe had little to do with him. "Primarch, you and I cannot be sure whether the future of the human empire has truly embarked on an unchangeable dead end, but I am more willing to believe that a Primarch who fights for humanity and the Emperor would not so easily choose a path that destroys all things. Because that is a mentality of escape, a choice of a coward, a mad act only made by the weak when they admit defeat. So tell me, Primarch, have you already admitted defeat deep within your heart? Do you believe that even though countless mortals and Astartes are fighting for the continued existence of the human empire, the future of the human empire is still a civilization destined to perish?" At this moment, Cypher's words struck Luo Sha and the wolf cub's massive bodies like invisible drumsticks. After a long silence, Luo Sha, taking a deep breath, suddenly spoke. "My faith in the human empire has always existed, just like the Emperor's unreasonable favoritism towards humanity. Come on, brothers, let us completely end this temporal disaster that threatens the entire galaxy. Thank you all for your support." Chapter 930, Caliban's Past, Time Remnants Part 10. While Caliban's desolate lands were being repeatedly ravaged by the artillery fire of countless traitors. Deep beneath the surface, where no one knew, a brutal war that made the combined demunkin of the Chaos Gods bleed rivers had been ongoing for a considerable amount of time. As far as the eye could see, strands of black and white mist permeated the large, cavern-like caves. Numerous bloodletters, wielding hellblades, led by 8 Khorne greater demons, had completely surrounded a super spacetime rift, which was dozens of meters tall. Strategic formations, which were previously uncommon in most Khorne Demonkin, had become the flesh and blood defense line these chaos demons relied on to resist the fierce impact of even more time remnants. And large numbers of Slaaneshi demonettes, weaving back and forth among the bloodletter troops, led by 6 Slaanesh greater demons, constantly reduced the overall number of time remnants with agility and sharp attacks that were imperceptible to the mortal eye. In an instant, time remnants, some with missing limbs, others twisted and deformed, were sliced and diced by demon weapons cutting through the air, ultimately dissipating completely into the depths of the black and white mist. Boom, 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 seeing the number of time remnants on the intense battlefield reduced to a certain extent. Following the heavy, earth-shaking footsteps, 13 colossal, even more twisted and terrifying, large time remnants, leading an even greater number of time remnants, suddenly burst out from within the super spacetime rift, quickly joining the repeated assaults on the Khorne Demonkin's flesh and blood defense line. At this moment, the 8 Khorne greater demons, gripping their Khorne great axes, originally intended to immediately flap the massive fleshy wings on their backs and go to obstruct the enemy's offensive. The next second, 7 great unclean one of Nurgle, as huge as small mountains, immediately swung the rotten greatswords in their palms with a chuckle, forcefully pushing aside the bloodletters beside their massive bodies and launching an astonishing welcoming ceremony towards those conspicuous large time remnants. Rumble. At this moment, the massive and resilient terrifying bodies of both sides repeatedly collided, and rotten greatswords, emitting green poisonous mist, mixed with Nurgle sorcery, swept towards the large time remnants. Just as distorted heads belonging to Luo Sha were flying everywhere. In a corner of the cave, temporarily away from the intense front line. A Tzeentch greater demon, flapping its huge blue wings back and forth, casually conjured a large number of amplifying chaos psychic power and poured them onto every chaos demon fighting diligently. At the same time, it also fixed its bobbing bird head on the super spacetime rift, observing its every movement. In fact, if it weren't for the inherent invulnerability of countless time remnants to psychic power, which caused the Tzeentch Demonkin, who had arrived early in Caliban's depths, to suffer a great loss, ultimately leaving only one Tzeentch greater demon, then it would absolutely not allow the rest of the Chaos Demonkin to become the top performers in the entire allied army. Buzz, buzz, buzz. At this moment, the Tzeentch greater demon's bird head swayed back and forth. It seemed to hear the roar of an aerial vehicle's engine. As the Tzeentch greater demon immediately turned its malevolent gaze, a Stormraven gunship carrying 3 terrifying figures quickly entered the cave. Tisk, 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 you could have come even later, the Chaos God's demons can still hold on. The sarcastic words of the Tzeentch greater demon quickly reached Luo Sha and the others' ears. And Luo Sha, whose massive body subconsciously exuded a large amount of pitch-black shadow, turned his head and stared at it, saying coldly, "Shut your bird beak. Do you have the right to speak here? It would be more appropriate if Carlos himself came." As soon as Luo Sha finished speaking, a grim-faced cipher quickly piloted the Stormraven gunship to a heavy landing. After his tall body landed on the ground, he immediately said in a deep voice towards the Tzeentch greater demon, "I have found Primarch Luo Sha. What exactly is the so-called closed-door plan? Now you should tell us." Hearing Cypher's words, the Tzeentch greater demon heavily landed its massive body, which had been suspended in midair. It repeatedly shook its huge bird head, saying reluctantly, "Our great my lord has foreseen everything in the high heavens. Because this super spacetime rift cannot be completely closed by chaos psychic power, we must use a power of the same origin to forcibly counteract it, only then is it possible to completely close it. And coincidentally, a part of the power possessed by your Primarch my lord is the only key to solving this problem. After all, he who tied the bell must untie it, no matter what. These time remnants are special products belonging to Primarch Luo Sha." The Tzeentch greater demon's low voice quickly echoed in the ears of the 3. At this moment, Lord Cypher, with a solemn expression, bowed his head in thought, seemingly pondering the truth of its words. The wolf cub, gripping the breaker warhammer in his single arm, glared menacingly at the Tzeentch Greater Demon, as if he was about to kill it the next second. And Luo Sha, with a cold expression, shifted his gaze towards the chaotic front line where intense fighting was taking place. We cannot know if Primarch Luo Sha's power can definitely close the super spacetime rift, nor do we know what situation Primarch Luo Sha will encounter. If Primarch Luo Sha successfully closes the rift but is accidentally severely injured, I fear you Chaos Great Demons will also have more ideas, won't you? At this moment, Lord Cypher, casually drawing the White Tiger Greatsword from the waist of his power armor, sneered towards the Tzeentch Greater Demon. However, the bobbing Tzeentch Greater Demon seemed to be angered by Lord Cypher's suspicion, and it immediately roared towards the three. You dare to doubt the great prophecy of Tzeentch? If the situation wasn't so critical, why would we great demons form a chaos-allied army to block the endless time remnants? I swear by my lord's name, if I deceive you with lies, then let your salted corpses destroy me. At this moment, Luo Sha, who had just turned his cold gaze back from the intense warhammer, suddenly raised his huge hand, tightly gripping the blood scythe. He exchanged glances with Cypher, who stood beside him, and the heavily nodding wolf cub. Then, fully prepared, Luo Sha said in a deep voice to the indignant Tzeentch Greater Demon. Tzeentch Greater Demon, you had better pray that the plan works, otherwise I will immediately turn back and chop off your bird head. The next moment, Luo Sha, suddenly activating his vibranium power armor, quickly led Cypher and Wolf, who had raised their melee weapons, towards the location of the super spacetime rift, launching a furious combat charge. Thank you all for your support. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And please support the author by link in description. The roars and howls of countless chaos demons rapidly swept past Luo Sha's ears. A large number of chaos demons, who would normally engage them in fierce conflict, quickly dispersed, clearing an incredibly wide path for the three-person group who were speeding madly. As Luo Sha and the others gradually approached the flesh and blood defensive line composed of countless bloodletters, Slaaneshi demonettes, whose running movements were incredibly swift, quickly encircled the perimeter of Luo Sha's trio. The wolf cub was visibly startled. However, he was temporarily restrained by the unmoving Luo Sha and Cypher beside him and did not make any attacking moves towards the Slaaneshi demonettes. In an instant, 6 Slaanesh Greater Demons, keepers of secrets, immediately leapt into the depths of the time remnants that were impacting the flesh and blood defensive line, at a terrifying speed that was difficult for the naked eye to discern. They repeatedly swung their incredibly sharp giant pincers or flesh whips, trying to minimize the threat posed by the time remnants. Immediately following, the 8 Khorne Greater Demons, who were originally responsible for holding the line for the countless bloodletters, also violently flapped their blood-red fleshy wings, carrying terrifying roars as they charged into the depths of the fierce battlefield, clearing suitable paths for Luo Sha's trio's advance. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. At this moment, Luo Sha, vigorously driving his vibranium power armor, suddenly stomped on the ground, leaping over the bloodletters who were wielding hellblades. The blood scythe, gripped tightly in his palm, swept out abruptly. In an almost instant, it swiftly cleaved dozens of dismembered time remnants into countless shattered corpses that vanished and dispersed. And just as Cypher and Wolf were also brandishing the weapons in their palms, more time remnants surging forward were forcibly blocked by countless rapidly dispersing Slaaneshi demonettes. Thus, Luo Sha's trio, who were gradually accelerating, did not linger in battle. They always knew what their mission was and immediately drove their power armor to continue speeding towards the super spacetime rift. Just a moment later, Luo Sha's trio, relying on the Slaanesh Greater Demons and Khorne Greater Demons to forcibly clear the way, successfully arrived directly in front of the super spacetime rift. A total of 14 Chaos Great Demons immediately surrounded them in the center, preventing more time remnants from turning around and launching attacks that could pose a threat. Rumble. However, just as Luo Sha quickly raised a giant palm, intending to touch the super spacetime rift. With a deafening roar, Luo Sha and the others, standing beneath the super spacetime rift, saw with their own eyes. A gigantic misty hand, over 100 meters in size, slowly penetrated the super spacetime rift and completely descended into the massive cave filled with black and white mist. The next moment, the terrifying giant misty hand, both in aura and form, merely struck casually. 6 frantically charging Slanesh greater demons and 8 Khorne greater demons who couldn't dodge were utterly sent back into the depths of the warp. Rumble. The ground of the entire cave seemed to suddenly crack open with incredibly astonishing deep fissures. The powerful impact spreading everywhere also caused countless chaos demons and Luo Sha's trio to fall heavily to the ground. However, just as this giant misty hand, covering the sky and sun, intended to change direction to strike Luo Sha and the others, Luo Sha, reacting even faster, drove his vibranium power armor and crashed into the super spacetime rift in a flying dive. Crack, crack, crack. The next second, as countless fragments of the vibranium power armor shell shattered and flew off. A tearing pain, incredibly familiar to Luo Sha, once again enveloped his massive body. In an instant, Luo Sha, who couldn't help but widen his eyes, seemed to see through the layers of illusory scenes deep within the super spacetime rift. He vaguely saw a terrifying existence seated amidst a colorful psychic throne. Its entire body was almost completely shrouded in black and white mist, making it impossible to discern any human form. Who are you? At this moment, Luo Sha, whose thoughts and consciousness were gradually becoming sluggish, struggled desperately. He let out a deafening roar towards the unknown terrifying existence. Subsequently, Luo Sha's heavily scarred massive body could no longer hold on, and he completely fell into a coma. Almost simultaneously, terrifying spatial rifts, visible to the naked eye, continuously spread throughout the war-torn world of Caliban. Whooshish! Luo Sha's massive body suddenly trembled. He couldn't help but slowly exhale a long breath from his nose and mouth. Luo Sha suddenly opened his tightly closed eyes, only to see a very familiar empty room, and Lord Cypher and the wolf cub standing not far away, as well as a large number of Dark Angel's Inner Circle veterans lying on the metal floor. Just dozens of meters away, the Warp 3 divine artifacts, having separated from their fused state, lay silently scattered on the surrounding metal floor. And Grand Master Azrael, with a solemn expression on his resolute face, had just lowered the power sword he held tightly in his palm. My Lord Primarch, are you all right? We were a moment late. At this moment, Librarian Grand Master Ezekiel, holding a power scepter, cautiously asked in Luo Sha's direction. Luo Sha, hearing the other party's words, first froze for a moment, then immediately frowned deeply. He raised his hand, signaling the other party not to speak. His massive body swiftly drove his vibranium power armor to stand before Cypher and Wolf, whose expressions were also uncertain and surprised. Cypher, Wolf, what is your last memory? Luo Sha asked the other party with an incredibly solemn tone. The underground caves of Caliban, we were attempting to close a super spacetime rift with the assistance of the Chaos Forces. I believe my memory must be correct, but what is the situation now? Cypher, narrowing his eyes, said to Luo Sha in front of him while trying to recall. Could it be that everything we just experienced was merely an illusion or false memory inflicted upon us by the Warp 3 divine artifacts? Tisk, if it was an illusion or false memory, then why is half of my arm missing? The wolf cub, hearing Cypher's words, couldn't help but bare his teeth. He raised his left arm, missing half of its forearm, into the sight of Luo Sha and the others. But my metal 10 rings and my sidearm, Furnace Heart, are still here. I clearly gave them to Lionel Johnson and did not retrieve them from him. Luo Sha, lowering his head to glance at his thick arm and the power armor's waist, shook his head. He said in a low voice, there are 2 possibilities right now. Either everything we just experienced was indeed just a false illusion accidentally triggered by the Warp 3 divine artifacts, or, with the complete disappearance of the super space-time rift that threatened the past and future of the entire galaxy, everything has now been successfully restored to its proper course. From my experience, I actually lean more towards the latter, and our successful return to the current timeline might be the Emperor's doing. Thank you for your support. The successful return of Luo Sha and his two companions, and the series of actions taken by Grand Master Azrael and others to abandon darkness for light, the Fortress Monastery Rebellion, which was accidentally corrupted and controlled by a large number of Inner Circle veterans due to the Warp 3 divine artifacts, finally entered its concluding phase of mopping up. The Dark Angels battle group's main fleet, lingering in the cold void, had long ceased its fierce engagement with the Hero Tower. Numerous trembling mortal captains were patiently waiting for batches of Smart Control Legion, personally controlled by Reditus and AI Stark, to board and inspect their vessels. Inside the Fortress Monastery, Astartes from the Space Wolves and Black Templars, led by Ragnar the Young Wolf, along with many Primaris new recruits and some Dark Angels veterans, had surrounded all the Inner Circle veterans on a plaza platform. And just as the Warp 3 divine artifacts completely lost their voice, the Inner Circle veterans, almost instantly freed from their deluded state, chose to kneel and surrender, unless their minds had already been corrupted by chaos. Soon after, many good tidings were conveyed one by one to Primarch Luo Sha. However, he did not choose to immediately slaughter all the Inner Circle veterans who participated in this rebellion. On one hand, the Warp 3 divine artifacts played a very significant role in fanning the flames of this Fortress Monastery rebellion, and the number of traitors who truly betrayed the Emperor was not large. On the other hand, it was also to appease loyal Astartes like Azrael. The Inner Circle of the Dark Angels had to be thoroughly cleansed. But more slaughter was not necessarily needed so soon after the battle. Inside the Cathedral Hall of the Fortress Monastery, countless bright lights, mimicking flickering flames, slowly cast cool light upon the colossal stone statues. The ancient statues of Lionel Johnson and the Great Emperor were the most conspicuous, seemingly silently observing everything below. At this moment, the servo-skull Reditus, hovering in midair, was dancing up and down around Wild Wolf Luo Sha, who had unfortunately lost an arm. Automatic servo robots, each equipped with silver vine tendrils, continuously used silver threads to probe his unrecoverable strange injuries, while also transmitting more measurement data to Reditus. And tens of meters away, beside a massive conference table, besides Primarch Luo Sha, who was resting with his eyes closed, and Lord Cypher, who was looking down at a large amount of data, there were also the virtual projections of Grand Master Azrael, Librarian Grand Master Ezekiel, Deathwing Grand Master Belial, and Ravenwing Grand Master Samael. My Lord Primarch, regarding the threat of this rebellion brought by Holy Master Saiful and Master Asmodai, we must express our deep regret. However, Ezekiel and I have also washed away the shame with their blood and lives, and even regained the battle honor belonging to the Dark Angels. But the immense role played by the Warp 3 divine artifacts in this rebellion should not be underestimated. Not all errors can be attributed to our Inner Circle, Azrael said, meticulously choosing his words, to Luo Sha and the others who were silently listening. Currently, all Inner Circle veterans involved in the rebellion, whether corrupted by chaos or not, have been imprisoned deep within the Fortress Monastery's dungeons. If you wish to thoroughly purge them, all of us have nothing to say, Azrael finished. Primarch Luo Sha, who had been resting with his eyes closed, slowly opened them. Everyone present seemed to catch a fleeting glimpse of countless surging, dark shadows in the depths of my Lord Primarch's eyes. Luo Sha took a deep breath and said expressionlessly, "Even if I don't pursue the specific cause of the Inner Circle Veterans Rebellion, the very existence of your Dark Angel's Inner Circle is an original sin. For countless years, you have, on more than one occasion, caused delays in battlefield opportunities due to hunting so-called fallen angels, even going so far as to betray allies, ultimately leading to many worlds of the human empire falling into the clutches of Xenos or Chaos. Even if I, in my official capacity as Dark Side Regent, personally sentence the entire Dark Angels battle group to excommunication as traitors, it would be a reasonable and just action. Neither the Terra Council nor the Inquisition would dare to stop it in the slightest. But I also don't want to wait until Lionel Johnson successfully returns, only for him to personally grab me by the throat and ask me where his blood descendants have gone. At this moment, Luo Sha, whose cold gaze swept back and forth across everyone, continued. That's right, your Dark Angels battle group has not yet been casually annihilated by me, simply for this reason alone. Therefore, my next words will be your only lifeline. I hope you listen carefully. From this moment on, the Dark Angels battle group will revert to Legion organization, no longer adhering to Regent Guilliman's Astartes Codex. You must completely restore the six-wings structure of the Great Crusade era, based on Primaris Astartes. However, the newly formed six wings are forbidden from forming inner circles or similar societal organizations, and you must no longer hunt any fallen angels. If you Dark Angels are not afraid of death, you can try to do so behind my back, as we cannot monitor your every move at all times. But if in the future your Legion once again forms an inner circle or similar organization, then don't blame me for not telling you the consequences in advance. At this moment, Azrael and the others, who had no dissatisfaction with the Dark Side Regent's command, immediately fell into deep thought. And just after Luo Sha's words temporarily ceased, Cypher, who had casually closed a stack of thick documents, suddenly spoke to everyone present. Although the Warp 3 divine artifacts have temporarily lost all sound and seem to be of no use, to prevent similar situations from recurring, my suggestion is to store them separately. The Tuchulcha engine will be kept by my Lord Primarch. As for the Ouroboros, you can choose to keep it in the Fortress Monastery or give it to me. The Plagueheart will be taken by the Wolf Cub. Moreover, if there are no unexpected circumstances, all the Inner Circle veterans you have imprisoned will not be arbitrarily executed. Simply killing them would be somewhat wasteful. The number of Astartes in Imperium Nihilus is not that abundant yet. They will undertake a penitent crusade under the personal supervision of my Lord Primarch and the Calamity Legion, until they shed their last drop of blood for humanity and the Emperor. In fact, for these Inner Circle veterans, this is undoubtedly the best choice. Additionally, I unexpectedly learned some secrets from a large amount of ancient data. Your Dark Angels Fortress Monastery seems to contain a large number of legendary forbidden weapons and even ancient technology. Although I don't want to be too blunt, my Lord Primarch must obtain a significant portion of valuable items worth taking before leaving the Fortress Monastery. Do you understand? Thank you for your support. Buzz buzz buzz. Deep within the cold void, the massive, rhombus-shaped hero tower was slowly retracting the connecting passage between itself and the Fortress Monastery, gradually moving towards the void navigation route. The Dark Angels, who had now learned to obey, successfully handed over more than 800 Inner Circle veterans who chose to atone for their sins to the Luo Sha trio, and the Primarch, who had stayed for a long time, finally decided to leave the Fortress Monastery and return to the Typhoon Fleet. In fact, due to Lord Cypher's extensive knowledge of the Dark Angels, Luo Sha and his companions obtained far more than just Astartes. To expedite the Primarch's departure from the Fortress Monastery, the Dark Angels also brought out many of their hidden forbidden technologies. Azrael personally presented Luo Sha with an STC template for phosphorescent weapons. Additionally, a batch of Gene-Eater weapons, with mass destruction capabilities far exceeding those of virus bombs, were received by Cypher and others. These terrifying weapons could even pre-designate a specific genetic material as their target, without causing any harm to carriers of other genetic materials. But what satisfied Luo Sha even more, or rather, what he couldn't put down, was the Extinction Relic, the Ascendio Battle Automaton, which was said to be able to suppress a Primarch with only 7 units. Ultimately, a total of 10 Extinction Relics, equipped with various containment and lockdown measures, entered Luo Sha's inventory page, becoming one of his most precious collectibles. As a layer of colorful Geller field slowly covered the hero tower's massive metal structure. The hero tower successfully entered warp travel mode by slowly opening a large warp gate at a visibly slow speed. And in the bridge room inside the tower, after Luo Sha had a long conversation with White and Cypher, who had just replaced his arm with vibranium, he also, for once, obtained some personal rest time. Buzz buzz buzz. At this moment, Luo Sha, narrowing his eyes, slowly opened the simulator that had once been forcibly sealed by the black and white chains, carefully checking whether all pages had undergone any other changes. The Golden Throne page was still constantly refreshing with new prayer support. The 2 high-level spaceship reward prayers associated with planned path and Korn still remained at the top of the page. The material storage page and the diplomacy page had not changed. Even the main page used to start the simulated training showed no abnormalities. However, when Luo Sha subconsciously scrolled the simulator page to the sacrifice page belonging to the Chaos Gods, a black and white page that had never appeared before was clearly displayed within his field of vision. This new page, seemingly condensed from countless black and white mists, was sometimes blurry and sometimes clear. And at the center of the entire page, a pitch black hole, shaped like a black hole, was slowly rotating. When Luo Sha, with tightly furrowed brows, stared at the pitch black hole for too long, he felt as if the pitch black hole was more like a peeking eye. What kind of changes happened to the future of the human empire that could make my future self so desperate and radical, to the point of having to choose the irreversible path of warp ascension? Luo Sha murmured, slowly taking a deep breath. Even though the current Primarch was always unwilling to think in that direction. But the partial evidence he could currently infer and find all proved one thing. That is, his future self had already embarked on the path of becoming a warp Loki. And from what was revealed on Caliban in the past, the him who chose to become the 6th Chaos God was not only indiscriminate between friend and foe, but also secretly extended his demonic claws towards the simulator. In fact, Luo Sha himself had not fantasized about becoming a terrifying existence whose combat power could rival that of a Chaos God. But that was a choice made voluntarily, while retaining self-awareness and even freedom of action. However, it now seemed that his future self was more like being passively forced into deep binding with the warp in the face of some desperate situation, thereby ascending to that extremely ancient chaos poker table. I remember the warp artifact Ouroboros once said that I could be Luo Sha, but Luo Sha might not be me. Could it be that one of my clones inadvertently got this opportunity? Otherwise, with my mentality of being irreconcilable with the warp, why would I choose to become a Chaos God? At this moment, Luo Sha's mind, rapidly turning, instantly analyzed countless possibilities. But in the end, he still forcibly interrupted his rampant crazy thoughts. I'll just focus on the present. I can secretly prepare myself mentally for anything, but future matters will be dealt with in the future. After all, the Emperor, him, doesn't seem to have any special expression about this. Could it be that there's still one missing at the chaos poker table in the warp? Luo Sha, who had completely closed the simulator page, slowly closed his eyes. His entire massive body seemed to gradually hide in the depths of countless pitch-black shadows, and then temporarily entered a special resting state of short sleep. Soon after, the immensely vast hero tower successfully returned to the cruising Typhoon fleet. And under the command of Primarch Luo Sha, more than 800 newly arrived Inner Circle veterans were immediately organized into a Dark Angels company. But unlike other Legion companies, although these Inner Circle veterans would not be troubled with weapons and equipment. However, the Dark Angels company would face the most dangerous battles and battlefields during the Legion's cruise, and in most cases, would not receive any support from the Legion. Only then could they completely wash away the numerous shames of participating in the Stone Rebellion and the Inner Circle pursuit. This was not Luo Sha deliberately making things difficult for the Inner Circle veterans. He wanted to uproot Azrael and others, who were the culprits. But unfortunately, that meeting on Caliban gave him some understanding of Lionel Johnson's overall personality. His true temper might not be much better than those traitor brothers. And for the sake of their brotherhood, Luo Sha still left the discretion over the Dark Angels to Lionel Johnson. Not long after, when there were basically no more affairs within the entire Calamity Legion that required the Primarch to personally inquire about and handle. Luo Sha, taking advantage of White and Cypher not having left the Legion, once again gathered the two of them inside his private palace. And when White and Cypher saw the golden throne coins Luo Sha casually handed over, sighing, they had no choice but to undergo the necessary simulated training with the Primarch. I hope the Emperor can bless us. I really don't want to create any more complications. Successfully completing a simulated training session without incident is the greatest victory. At this moment, Luo Sha, his gaze shifting back and forth, spoke to his brothers in a low voice. Thank you all for your support. Chapter 934, Son of the Forest, Lionel Johnson, Part 1. Open black lens bracket simulation starting, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket current identities. Luo Sha, 13th Great Company Captain of the Space Wolves Calamity Legion Fleet. Luo Sha, Lord Cypher Calamity Legion Fleet. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket current companions. Luo Sha of the Space Wolves Normal. Luo Sha, Lord Cypher Normal. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Please select your landing identity and companions first. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. If you refuse, a random landing will occur. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Identity selection refused, companion landing selected. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Simulation restarting, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You are already in the Warhammer universe, a random landing time and location will be chosen for you. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Time, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Location, Camus. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You successfully landed deep within a gloomy forest filled with towering ancient trees. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. The moment you opened your tightly shut eyes, the familiar scent of soil and bushes rushed into your nostrils. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. However, you instinctively became wary of the thin wisps of mist floating freely in the air within your field of vision. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Until you fully confirmed that these thin wisps of mist were merely a normal occurrence in the gloomy forest, and not a special sign of impending time remnants. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You immediately lowered your head to check your own condition. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You found that in addition to your vibranium power armor being perfectly intact on your massive body, your storage page could also be opened normally. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Countless stored combat supplies and many special life-saving methods were displayed within your field of vision. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You pulled out the blood scythe, its sharp edge glowing green, and gripped it tightly in your massive palm, which was fully encased in vibranium armor. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You carefully scanned the unfamiliar surroundings. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You seemed to hear the subtle sound of a river flowing slowly. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You immediately activated your vibranium power armor and walked towards the direction of the sound. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Your massive body walked with powerful strides beneath countless towering ancient trees, and clumps of leafy bushes occasionally brushed against the surface of your vibranium armor, making faint sounds. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You felt that the gloomy forest environment here was somewhat overly familiar, filled with a sense of déjà vu. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You felt as if you had encountered a similar scene somewhere before. Close black lens bracket. Caliban, you murmured in a low voice. Open black lens bracket. You didn't know how long you had been advancing. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You seemed to have lost track of time. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You safely passed through a large stretch of gloomy forest composed of countless towering ancient trees. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. As soon as you stepped out of the edge of the gloomy forest, you immediately saw an ancient castle, lower in height than the surrounding towering ancient trees. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You also saw a seemingly solitary small boat floating on the wide moat in front of the ancient castle. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. In the center of this small boat, you also saw an elderly man with sunken cheeks, emaciated limbs, and an old crown on his gray-white hair. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You quickened your pace and arrived at the bank closer to the elderly man. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You could also observe carefully that in his wrinkled, aged hand, he seemed to be clutching a fishing rod with the line extending into the river, and occasionally, a hint of immense, suppressed pain would show on his expressionless face. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You seemed to smell the scent of blood from the elderly man and saw 5 terrifying black shadows swimming back and forth in the calm river deep beneath the small boat. Close black lens bracket. Old man, be careful, I see many big fish under your small boat. You couldn't help but warn the silently fishing elderly man. Open black lens bracket. You saw him seem to turn his head and glance at you, and a fleeting, faint smile subtly appeared on his sunken, aged face. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You were about to ask him some questions about this place. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. The elderly man, who had been silently fishing, suddenly raised his hand and pointed in a direction for you. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You instinctively turned your gaze, filled with doubt. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Through the numerous towering ancient trees, you vaguely saw another castle palace almost completely obscured by the gloomy forest, and a winding but clean and tidy forest path. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You involuntarily activated your vibranium power armor and quickly walked towards the incredibly clean forest path. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You seem to have completely forgotten the elderly man still fishing alone on the river, as well as the 5 terrifying black shadows beneath the river. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You successfully stepped your magnetic boots onto this winding but incredibly clean forest path. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You were about to continue moving forward. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Your nostrils suddenly caught the extremely familiar scent of decay. Close black lens bracket. It's the stench of chaos decay again. You instinctively tightened your grip on the blood scythe in your massive palm and said coldly. Open black lens bracket. Your massive body couldn't help but rush off the incredibly clean forest path, constantly sprinting towards the depths of the gloomy forest from which the decaying smell continuously emanated. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You seem to have successfully escaped a illusory yet real unknown space. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Your entire consciousness also became clearer. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Your cold gaze immediately saw that in the gloomy forest clearing ahead, a dozen massive predatory beasts with mottled green scales were about to completely devour 3 terrified, ragged mortals. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. And the large amount of chaotic decaying stench came precisely from these thoroughly corrupted predatory beasts. Close black lens bracket. Buzz buzz buzz. Open black lens bracket. You unhesitatingly accelerated your combat charge, and a buzzing sound faintly echoed within your vibranium power armor. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You suddenly manipulated a series of metal 10 rings that rapidly detached from your thick arm. These incredibly agile flying metal 10 rings continuously cut through the air, completely attracting the attention of the numerous predatory beasts and temporarily protecting the fragile lives of the 3 mortals. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. The next second, as the distance between both sides continuously closed, the blood scythe, tightly gripped in your massive palm, forcefully bisected a pouncing predatory beast, and its sharply swept blade then successively left several other predatory beasts severely wounded. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Large amounts of hot blood, emitting a decaying smell, repeatedly splattered onto your vibranium power armor, but the number of predatory beasts decreased at a visible rate. close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You instinctively let out a deafening battle roar, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Shadow clones, rapidly condensed from wisps of dark shadow power, also roared into existence in the air, embedding blood scythes heavily into the massive bodies of the remaining predatory beasts, close black lens bracket. Thump thump thump. Open black lens bracket. However, at this moment, with a sudden heavy footstep sound reaching your ears, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. A powerful giant, about 4 meters tall, wearing a set of dark green power armor on his massive body, launched an incredibly terrifying attack against the remaining predatory beasts, close black lens bracket. Rumble. Thank you all for your support. Chapter 935, Son of the Forest, Lionel Johnson, Part 2. Even without any weapons, this strong giant, clad in power armor, knocked down the remaining predator beasts with just his 2 fists. You were slightly startled by this, then your massive body immediately stopped its attack. You casually pulled 3 trembling mortals, who were paralyzed on the ground, out of the battle zone. Rumble. Once the last predator beast had completely fallen and made no sound, you slowly activated your vibranium power armor and walked towards the strong giant who was removing his metal helmet. I never thought I would see you again in this world, Brother Luo Sha, the other party said with emotion, holding his metal helmet under his thick arm. You immediately saw Lionel Johnson, the first Primarch, whose appearance, face, and overall demeanor were completely different from your memories. Your gaze, filled with shock, fixed on Lionel Johnson, who now looked incredibly old, with white hair and even a partially bald head. Brother, to be honest, I didn't expect to run into you either. How are you feeling now? Do you need any medical assistance? You took a deep breath, carefully choosing your words as you asked the aged Lionel Johnson. I am not injured, but I feel that my reaction time, strength, and stamina have all decreased significantly. Is there some curse or disease here? Lionel Johnson, his brows slightly furrowed, shook his head as he spoke to you. All right, let me burst this illusion, Lion, are those things you're feeling just because you've gotten old? You sighed and said to Lionel Johnson with a sincere expression. At this moment, you immediately saw Lionel Johnson, who had been slightly stunned, gradually fall silent. Afterward, as if having gathered his emotions, Lionel Johnson asked you about the human empire, the Emperor, and the specific situations of his other Primarch brothers. The Emperor is still the same, still sitting on the golden throne enduring endless torment. If there's any change, it's just that he's become a bit more active after the Great Rift opened. What? You ask what the Great Rift is. My suggestion is to wait until dark, look up at the night sky, and you'll understand. I'll explain it thoroughly to you then. You briefly explained to Lionel Johnson the current predicament and difficulties facing the human empire. You told him about the disappearance and whereabouts of some Primarch brothers, as well as the recent situations of the traitor Primarch brothers. When you mentioned that Lionel Johnson was not the only Primarch who had returned, but also Regent Gilliman, you could clearly see that Lionel Johnson's tightly furrowed brow seemed to relax slightly. However, when you spoke of how, 10,000 years ago, Gilliman used the Astartes Codex to divide the Astartes legions into countless warbands of only 1,000 Astartes each, you immediately witnessed the bizarre scene of the enraged, aged Lionel Johnson cursing Gilliman, even wishing he could personally kill him. Facing Lionel Johnson, who was venting his emotions, you slowly exhaled. You decided not to tell him about the troubling matters concerning the Dark Angel's inner circle for now. Soon after, when the heavily breathing Lionel Johnson had completely calmed down, your massive body slowly moved your power armor forward. You opened your 2 thick arms wide and gave Lionel Johnson, whose movements were stiff due to awkwardness or unfamiliarity, a firm hug. Welcome back, old brother. Although you lost a lot during these 10,000 years, you will gain even more upon your successful return. You said to Lionel Johnson with sincere emotion. You had never deeply understood Lionel Johnson's true thoughts. Because in the past, Lionel Johnson was indeed short-tempered, and his way of dealing with his Primarch brothers was full of sharp edges. Even though Lionel Johnson now looked older, the overall feeling he gave you was completely different. At the very least, he had learned to listen intently and express emotions clumsily. You and Lionel Johnson temporarily ended this brief conversation. You both activated your power armor and turned, arriving before the three mortals who had been quietly listening to the Primarch's conversation. The mortals, who had just survived the predator beasts, told you about the existence of a human camp and that their camp also had a guardian similar in form to you. Lionel Johnson vaguely suspected whether other Primarch brothers had also arrived. You shook your head slightly and told Lionel Johnson about the existence of Cypher and the Wolf Avatar. So, the two of you decided to escort the mortals back to the camp and also meet the Guardian. However, before everyone left, Lionel Johnson casually picked one of the intact predator beast carcasses and hoisted it onto his thick shoulder armor. You instinctively reminded him that these predator beasts had been corrupted by chaos and were inedible, but Lionel Johnson, with a calm expression, stated that these beasts were not much different from Caliban beasts. For a period of time afterward, you and Lionel Johnson, led by the mortals, quickly embarked on the journey to the human camp. But when all of you finally reached the entrance of the human camp, before crossing the defensive barricades made of trees and bushes, and Astartes, who had just stepped out of a crude building, upon seeing Lionel Johnson beside you, unhesitatingly pulled the trigger of his bolter at him. And you immediately recognized the true identity of this Astartes. He was an unforgiven, a fallen angel perpetually hunted by the Dark Angel's inner circle. At this moment, Lionel Johnson, reacting incredibly quickly, suddenly threw down the beast carcass he had been carrying on his thick shoulder armor. Even though his overall qualities had diminished significantly, he was still not in a situation where an ordinary Astartes could threaten him. Lionel Johnson's massive body easily dodged a volley of incoming bolter rounds. Before the Astartes could even draw his combat knife or chainsword, Lionel Johnson had already lunged him several meters away, pinning him firmly to the mud-splattered ground. 15th Warband, 3rd Company, 2nd Destroyer Squad Knight, Master of the Knights of the Holy Trinity, and Astartes of the Dreadwing, Zabriel. Lionel Johnson, who had quickly identified the opponent's markings, roared in a deep voice. "You traitor, how dare you try to harm me again? Traitor! You are the traitor! You abandoned us! You abandoned Caliban! You even abandoned the human empire!" The Astartes, forcibly pinned beneath his Gene Father, roared back defiantly. "Thank you all for your support. From your perspective as an observer, everything that happened on Caliban was an inextricable mess. You even knew that the Dark Angel's Legion had internal ethnic conflicts from Lionel Johnson's first return to the Imperium, and even earlier, from its very establishment. Later, it gradually developed into factions loyal to the Emperor, factions loyal to Lionel Johnson, factions loyal to the Human Empire, and factions loyal to Luther, which gave rise to many more complicated problems. If a young Lionel Johnson were replaced by Gilliman from the same period, then this complex situation might still have had a chance of being successfully salvaged. However, everyone knows that Lionel Johnson at that time was not only taciturn but also had a temper like fire, occasionally even causing his descendants' heads to be completely removed. Even when competing with Horus for the position of War Master, few Primarch brothers were willing to strongly support him. It was precisely because of the complex interweaving of various factors that it ultimately led to the fratricidal conflict and the mutual destruction between foster father and son before the destruction of the world of Caliban. Admittedly, chaos played a significant role in it, but if Lionel Johnson had been willing to open his heart and have a frank discussion with his foster father Luther and some of his descendants, perhaps their suspicions and grievances would have been greatly reduced. Thump thump thump. You immediately drove your vibranium power armor forward. With words and a bowing motion, you completely separated Lionel Johnson, whose expression was furious, and Zabriel, a fallen angel who was firmly pinned to the ground by his Gene Father. You hesitated for a moment but still informed Lionel Johnson about the specific situation of the Dark Angel's inner circle and the true experiences of the fallen angels over the past 10,000 years. You clearly saw a fleeting trace of guilt and sorrow appear on Lionel Johnson's old face, which was filled with anger and majesty. After Lionel Johnson heard that you had temporarily cleared and dispersed the Dark Angel's inner circle forces, he suddenly spoke to you. Luo Sha, your methods for clearing the inner circle were too lenient. Given the serious crimes the inner circle has committed over a long period, if it were me, not a single Grand Master or Commander in the entire Dark Angels would be left. Lionel Johnson's low voice echoed in your ears. But you remained noncommittal and did not engage in any verbal dispute with him. Even if Primarchs are already a non-human existence, their underlying humanity rarely changes, unless they have already embraced chaos, otherwise, they will always be dissatisfied with others overstepping their bounds. At this moment, Lionel Johnson, whose anger had subsided considerably, gazed solemnly at Zabriel, who was close at hand. Lionel Johnson, whose personality seemed to have undergone a drastic change, patiently engaged in a stiff conversation with him. You immediately drove your vibranium power armor, turned, and dispersed the hundreds of mortals who had gradually gathered due to the intense conflict between the Guardian and the Outsider. After Zabriel, from his own perspective, finished describing some of the events that occurred on Caliban to the silently listening Lionel Johnson. Lionel Johnson, after a moment of silence, suddenly asked in a solemn tone. Zabriel, you said I abandoned the Imperium, abandoned the Dark Angels. Do you dare to swear to me by what you cherish most that you still remain loyal? Regardless of what stance your commander chose back then, do you still love the Emperor and humanity now? Did you raise your weapon against your other brothers and me simply because you thought you had been betrayed? I swear. Zabriel, who heavily punched his thick chest plate, stared intently into Lionel Johnson's eyes and said. You slowly took a deep breath. You were just about to express your blessings for the complete reconciliation between this fallen angel and Lionel Johnson. Zabriel, whose expression remained tense, growled towards Lionel Johnson. But, do you dare to swear to me by what you cherish most that you still maintain your loyalty to the Emperor? Do you, King of Lions, still love the Emperor and humanity? Did you raise your weapon against your descendants simply because you also thought you had been betrayed? His low voice quickly echoed in the surrounding air. You subconsciously tensed your mind, preventing either party from showing any signs of attacking. However, somewhat to your surprise, Lionel Johnson, with a solemn expression, said in a deep voice to his blood descendant without any hesitation. I swear. At this moment, your recently tensed mind completely relaxed. The current Lionel Johnson was indeed different from before, whether in his treatment of you, his Primarch brother, or his blood descendants. Over the next period, you and Zabriel, who had once again become Lionel Johnson's only attendant, detailed to Lionel Johnson the specific origins of the Great Rift and the difficult situation the Imperium currently faced. Facing such a dense amount of important information, even Lionel Johnson had to repeatedly skin the predator beasts to maintain his mental stability. You also unexpectedly learned from Zabriel that among the Xenos and chaos currently rampant on Karma's world, the most powerful force was a chaos warband named the Thousand Eyes Warband. You subconsciously shifted your gaze, staring at Lionel Johnson, who was carefully cutting and carving next to the predator beast. You suggested that Lionel Johnson and the others wait patiently. You could temporarily clear out the Thousand Eyes Warband on Karmas, and then you would dispatch the Typhoon fleet again to find this unknown planet located in Imperium Nihilus. You even suggested that Lionel Johnson directly return to Holy Terra to preside over the overall situation, or gather more loyal fallen angels to reorganize the Dark Angels Legion. Brother, that might be the path you should take, but not mine. You also know that I once experienced such days, living alone in dangerous forests, isolated from others, with countless fierce beasts coveting Primarch flesh lurking in the shadows around me. Lionel Johnson, who was looking down and wiping his blood-stained knife, said to you without looking up. Everyone knows my later choice, and this is also the necessary responsibility that we, as Primarchs, cannot escape. Our father was the great conqueror in human history, and I, too, became a conqueror because of him. But this is not my true nature, I prefer to hunt enemies. Any enemy of humanity is my prey. Therefore, I will resume my former endeavor, protecting others. But I will not demand allegiance or worship from anyone. I will thoroughly kill all those who oppress them. As for whether they are willing to follow me, it is entirely up to their personal will. Thank you all for your support." It seemed Lionel Johnson had rediscovered his ideals and goals worth fighting for. You seemed to see an old Lionel Johnson gradually reveal his terrifying fangs, which had not suffered any damage. Immediately after, the three of you gathered around a blazing bonfire to discuss how to eliminate the Thousand Eyes warband on Karma's world, as well as anything that could threaten the local humans. However, just as Zabriel and Lionel Johnson were worried about how to get more food for the humans in the camp, and even how to get through the initial stages of the reclamation war lacking weapons and ammunition. You shook your head slightly. You silently activated your vibranium power armor and stood up, moving to a relatively open space. Under the gaze of Lionel Johnson, Zabriel, and many other curious mortals, you slowly raised a massive hand. The next second, a large amount of food supplies stored in the inventory page, as well as piles of weapons and ammunition that gradually accumulated into small mountains, suddenly appeared in everyone's field of vision. At this moment, you faced Lionel Johnson and the others, whose eyes were wide with surprise, with a calm expression, and said in a composed tone, "What else do we need? I also brought some heavy ground vehicles and flying vehicles, and there's no shortage of weapons and ammunition, enough to last until the local armory resumes manufacturing." As soon as your words fell, Lionel Johnson, with a solemn expression, suddenly activated his power armor and rose from the ground. He came before you and heavily patted your thick shoulder armor with a massive hand. "Thank you," the other party said to you with extreme solemnity. You shrugged at Lionel Johnson and immediately activated your vibranium power armor to quickly inventory the various supplies with an excited Zabriel. Soon after, this small camp of only 100 people instantly became an impregnable war fortress on the entire Karma's world. Teams of automatic servo robots, waving mechanical tentacles, replanned the overall layout of the camp buildings while setting up heavy firepower weapons and whirlwind missile launchers in suitable defensive positions. A young female mortal named Ruina became the recognized leader by everyone, beginning to lead the mortals in organizing the camp and preparing for the arrival of more mortals. You also embarked on the path to the area occupied by the Thousand Eyes warband with Lionel Johnson and Zabriel. In your opinion, it was a rare honor for a mere Chaos warband to require two Primarchs to personally deal with it, even if they were to be utterly slaughtered. If you weren't more concerned about Lionel Johnson's opinion of you, you would have long since activated the thrusters on your vibranium power armor and flown directly to various parts of the planet to unleash carnage. However, besides using a few hoverbikes for travel, the three of you did not take the Thunderhawk transport you wanted to extract to your destination. And according to Lionel Johnson, doing so would be too ostentatious. You might as well take the opportunity to scout the environmental conditions of the entire Camus. From the sights you carefully observed along the way, although the entire Camus was filled with chaos-corrupted beasts resembling predatory giant beasts. Most areas, however, were not severely contaminated by chaos. They would return to their original state after a period of cleansing and purification. As time gradually passed, you slowly entered the suburban area not far from a large city. Through the skull helmet's eyepiece, you saw that many streets and buildings had completely collapsed and burned down, and countless mortals who had not had time to escape the city had become scattered skeletal remains. At this moment, not only you, but even Lionel Johnson and Zabriel, who stood beside you, couldn't help but frown. This was not fear or dread of the impending enemy. Rather, it was your endless anger towards these Chaos Astartes who had betrayed the Emperor. Their choice to slaughter and sacrifice mortal civilians only solidified your resolve for revenge. You quickly raised a massive hand. You extracted a good amount of equipment and supplies out of thin air, placing more choices before Lionel Johnson and Zabriel. Lionel Johnson looked down at the dazzling array of weapons and equipment, but he only chose a vibranium energy shield that could defend against long-range firepower, and an ordinary vibranium power greatsword. After replenishing his bolter ammunition, Zabriel only chose a meltagun and an intact chainsword. The three of you, without any hesitation, activated your power armor and quickly began infiltrating the city ahead. Your massive body moved silently as if teleporting, shuttling and leaping through the shadows of various building ruins, and while Lionel Johnson's stealth technique did not have the bonus of your shadow power, he also did not make any subtle sounds. In fact, in your opinion, among the many Primarch brothers, Lionel Johnson's stealth ability was probably only second to yours and Corax's, and not much inferior to Koss's. By the time you successfully reached the center of the city, you almost immediately saw a large castle that once belonged to the Blood Angels, and the Chaos Cultists who were repeatedly patrolling or going mad in the surrounding area. Buzz buzz buzz. At this moment, Zabriel, whose stealth ability was weaker, seemed to have attracted the attention of some Chaos Cultists. You and Lionel Johnson, who was not far away, immediately exchanged glances. With perfectly coordinated movements, you quickly activated your power armor and revealed yourselves, launching a frenzied slaughter against the Chaos Cultists who were continuously emitting indistinct roars. In an instant, a large amount of flesh and blood remnants from the Chaos Cultists repeatedly splattered onto your vibranium power armor. Even these Chaos Cultists, whose flesh and blood had mutated due to Chaos corruption, could hardly withstand a casual blow from a Primarch or an Astartes. And Lionel Johnson, who suddenly wielded his vibranium power greatsword, directly carved out a terrifying blood-soaked path filled with corpses among the countless Chaos Cultists who surged forward. In just a few tens of seconds, the Chaos Cultists, with casualties reaching over 1,000, temporarily lost their ability to continue attacking. The three of you took the opportunity to rush towards the entrance of the large castle. Hiss hiss hiss. However, at this moment, you watched with your own eyes as Lionel Johnson and Zabriel, who had stepped into the interior of the large castle first, disappeared out of thin air into the wisps of gray mist. Your magnetic boots also subconsciously stepped into the confines of the large castle, and your entire massive body was completely enveloped by a large amount of grayish-white mist. Chapter 938, Son of the Forest, Lionel Johnson, Part 5. Your vigilance has reached its peak, and wisps of dark shadow cycle continuously over the surface of your massive body. The blood scythe, gripped tightly in your enormous palm, also indicates that you are ready for any battle. However, the large amount of grayish-white mist swirling in your visual field did not produce any sound, nor did it stimulate your beast instincts to give any warning of danger. You immediately took a tentative step backward, but the surrounding scenery was still an endless grayish-white mist, rather than allowing you to directly exit the entrance of the huge castle. You couldn't help but let out a low, cold laugh. Without any hesitation, you lifted your heavy magnetic boots, driving the vibranium power armor on your massive body, and began exploring deeper into the countless grayish-white mists. If this was some kind of trap meticulously set by the Chaos Astartes of the Thousand Eyes Warband, you don't believe they alone can escape the terrifying wrath of a Primarch. As for Lionel Johnson and Zabriel, you are even less worried about their safety. If any enemy truly underestimates Lionel Johnson, who appears very old on the outside, then you can only pity their brains for being too corrupted by chaos. Thump, thump, thump. Just then, as your massive body rapidly moved through the grayish-white mist, you seemed to faintly hear deafening thudding sounds. You subconsciously quickened your heavy steps, the blood scythe gripped tightly in your enormous palm already poised for attack. The next moment, the seemingly endless grayish-white mist within your field of vision noticeably dimmed. You abruptly halted your heavy steps and immediately saw a tall figure with an extremely familiar back on an old, spacious square. Wolf Cub, you're actually here. You couldn't help but roar in a deep voice at the Wolf Cub, who was repeatedly hammering a large sunken area of the ground with his vibranium arm and breaker warhammer. But when the slightly stiff figure turned around at the sound, you saw a ferocious face covered in dark red veins, and a pair of bloodthirsty wolf eyes still 90% dominated by countless escaping crimson lights. To be honest, I always thought Cypher would be the first brother to break, but I never expected it would be you who had a problem. You slowly removed the skull helmet covering your head and sighed, shaking your head at the wolf cub, who was about to be completely corrupted by chaos. At this moment, the regret you expressed to him was only met with a roar that echoed all around. The wolf cub, suddenly wielding his breaker warhammer, fiercely drove his power armor, charging madly towards you like a full-throttle humanoid tank. You, not to be outdone, also drove the vibranium power armor on your massive body, your magnetic boots forcefully stepping on the already broken hard ground. In an instant, your massive body and the wolf cub's tall body collided heavily, and visible impact waves swept from between you into the surrounding air. Even though your body size is now more than twice that of the wolf cub, judging from the almost unmoving wrestling stance of both sides. The wolf cub's physical strength is already not weaker than yours, a true primarch. Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. Unfortunately, the true reason a primarch is far superior to an Astartes can never be compared by sheer strength alone. HMPH. Your cold gaze stared directly at the wolf cub, who was close at hand, and you couldn't help but let out a cold snort. Wisps of dark shadow suddenly surged out from your massive body, instantly transforming into bare-handed shadow clones that heavily struck the wolf cub's power armor and his long-haired head. At the same time, you suddenly lifted one heavy magnetic boots, and with just one kick, you sent the wolf cub's entire tall body flying hundreds of meters to the edge of the square. The next second, you instantly appeared beside the wolf cub, having suddenly performed a shadow step. You did not raise the blood scythe, its sharp blade glowing green, to end the wolf cub, who was already close to the corruption limit. One of your heavy magnetic boots was heavily stomping on the wolf cub's thick chest plate, and repeatedly condensing and dissipating shadow clones continuously restrained his limbs, preventing the furiously roaring wolf cub from getting up and resisting. You casually pulled out a bottle of Emperor's blood from the storage space behind your power backpack. Your huge hands forcefully crushed the container, allowing a large amount of pale golden blood, slowly burning with golden fire, to flow along your fingers onto the wolf cub's tall body. Then, slightly bending down, you, like a cruel beast, began to repeatedly punch the wolf cub's head with your two flaming iron fists. Boom, boom, boom. After a series of deafening roars echoed all around, the wolf cub's entire upper body was almost completely smashed by you into the depths of the hard ground. You did not easily choose to kill the wolf cub. You were trying to forcibly awaken his consciousness through the golden fire passively ignited by the Emperor's blood, thereby saving your clone brother who was about to become a minion of chaos. Not long after, you personally saw the dark red veins on the wolf cub's swollen face slowly recede, and even his eyes, which were originally emitting countless crimson lights, completely dimmed. Hiss. Primarch. Why do I feel like my entire head has been repeatedly run over by the metal treads of a Lehman Russ tank? The wolf cub, whose consciousness was gradually clearing, lay in the shattered crater, grimacing and muttering to you. Are you awake? You were just one step away from becoming a minion of Khorne. What happened to you before I arrived? You asked, looking down at the wolf cub with an indifferent gaze. At this moment, the wolf cub, slowly driving his power armor to sit up from the broken ground, repeatedly shook his increasingly swollen head. Russ's leg hair. The blood god actually successfully pulled my consciousness into an unknown illusion. The more fiercely I fought, the more enemies I faced, and the more I killed, the more the blood god's blessings accumulated like a steady stream. It was simply impossible to guard against. The wolf cub, lifting his swollen face to gaze at you, took a deep breath, his expression helpless as he spoke. Thank you all for your support. Chapter 939, Son of the Forest, Lionel Johnson, Part 6. Boom. Just as you were having a detailed discussion with the wolf cub. The ceiling of the old plaza seemed to have suffered an extremely severe collapse. The next second, Lionel Johnson, wielding two power swords, landed heavily along with the shattered corpses of several Chaos Astartes. You immediately drove your vibranium power armor forward, and the bruised and swollen wolf cub, after recovering for a while, also came to Lionel Johnson's side. The main force of the Thousand Eyes warband isn't on Camus. There are only 7 damned Chaos cultists here. The Chaos aura on your clone is getting thicker and thicker. Do you need my help? At this moment, Lionel Johnson, with his cold gaze, immediately recognized the wolf cub he had seen before. You shook your head slightly, refusing Lionel Johnson's offer, and at the same time, raised your hand to stop the wolf cub's rude words that were about to burst out. Perhaps it was the deep friendship between the space wolves and the dark angels in the past that made the wolf cub always seem to be at odds with Lionel Johnson. For the next period, Lionel Johnson, who had successfully acquired a power sword named Loyalty, and the two of you explored the entire enemy stronghold together. Although the chaos Astartes left behind by the Thousand Eyes warband had been cleared by you, the intermittent communication calls from Zabriel still led you deeper into the massive castle. And after you explored the armory and numerous grim rooms filled with dismembered human corpses, you reunited with Zabriel, who had been waiting for a long time. A secret dungeon, accidentally discovered by Zabriel, also became your final exploration target. The four of you had just driven your vibranium power armor inside when you immediately saw 9 blood angels Astartes forcefully bound to the wall by numerous thick, heavy chains. There are still survivors here. The wolf cub, whose swollen face had mostly recovered, said without turning his head, carrying his breaker warhammer with a vibranium arm. You carefully observed the 9 blood angels, whose eyes were pitch black, who seemed completely devoid of reason, and whose twisted faces only showed a desire for blood, and you instinctively let out a sigh. Their bloodthirst and black rage have erupted simultaneously. There's basically no possibility of saving them, the wolf cub, with a solemn expression, said to Zabriel beside him. Lionel Johnson's aged face showed little change in emotion. He casually drew the power sword named Loyalty and slowly drove his power armor forward, intending to give the 9 blood angels release. Just as the dark angels have their inner circle secrets, the bloodthirst and black rage of the blood angels are a lifelong affliction and shadow for all their descendants. At this moment, remembering something vaguely from your memory, you immediately drove your vibranium power armor forward. Just as Lionel Johnson raised his power sword, you told him you wanted to try saving these blood angels, and if it failed, it wouldn't be too late to act. Lionel Johnson turned his head, gazed at you, and then nodded, agreeing to your request. You were not 100% confident that you could restore the blood angel's sanity. You just occasionally recalled how you had forced the Howling Griffins, who had succumbed to the black rage, back to normal. Your massive body stood closer to the 9 blood angels, listening to their roars and howls, and slowly closed your eyes. The next second, a pair of incredibly ethereal blood-red transparent wings burst forth from behind your broad back. And apart from the wolf cub, who knew some secrets, Lionel Johnson and Zabriel, who were present, instinctively widened their eyes, watching your every move. Father. In an instant, even though the 9 irrational blood angels were already deep in bloodthirst and black rage, they still let out the pained wails of blood descendants from their roars and howls. You then vigorously flapped your 2 blood-red transparent wings, and ethereal blood-red feathers fell onto the tall bodies of the blood angels. In just a moment, these blood angels, who had been constantly roaring and howling, gradually quieted down. Their sanity, which had been completely lost to bloodthirst and black rage, seemed to have been successfully restored. At the same time, the terrifying sight of Sanguinius being brutally murdered by Horus seemed to burst forth in the depths of your eyes, and an extreme craving for blood also arose within your massive body. You clenched your teeth tightly, forcibly resisting the bloodthirst and black rage, which you hadn't felt in a long time, with the Primarch's resilient will. Lionel Johnson, who had carefully observed the blood angels for a few moments, slowly put away his power sword and drove his power armor to turn and walk out. Soon after, as the 4 of you quickly left the interior of the massive castle, the 9 blood angels, who had just regained their sanity, unexpectedly became part of your team. You returned to the rapidly changing camp, carrying all the ammunition and supplies you had plundered. The victory you achieved in just one day greatly invigorated the fighting spirit of countless ordinary people. You and Lionel Johnson and the others did not rest for long. After the 9 blood angels took the panacea you provided and successfully recovered from their internal injuries, they redonned newly produced power armor, instantly becoming a highly effective assault team. You and Lionel Johnson immediately led this Blood Angels squad, along with a portion of ordinary people capable of driving various vehicles, to officially launch the first battle to reclaim Camus. As countless chaos cultists in city after city were eradicated by you, large numbers of surviving citizens gradually and bravely emerged from their hiding places, joining the massive force that used Lionel Johnson as its propaganda banner. And once most of the cities on Camus were reclaimed, you began searching for a massive ship capable of leaving this planet, with the help of the Sol Adeptus Mechanicus. During this time, following Zabriel's small suggestion and your careful preparation, 10 ordinary Lion Guards, whose physical abilities were enhanced by super soldier serum injections and who even wore human power armor, became Lionel Johnson's honor guard. Even though Lionel Johnson explicitly refused, under the repeated persuasion of countless ordinary people and Zabriel, he reluctantly accepted this group of ordinary Lion Guards, who were far more loyal than the inner circle. Thank you all for your support. Chapter 940, Son of the Forest, Lionel Johnson, Part 7. The Thousand Eyes Warband, acting with extreme caution, left no spacefaring vessels capable of departing the star system on Karma's world, only countless metallic debris drifting alone in the cold void. This was your specific judgment after you personally piloted a Thunderhawk transport, leading Lionel Johnson to the shattered spaceport in low orbit, based on the situation at the scene. In other words, Karma's world was currently an isolated world forgotten in Imperium Nihilus, and there were countless other isolated worlds in similar situations. You seemed to notice Lionel Johnson's gaze instinctively falling upon you. You turned your head and explained with a wry smile to your taciturn Primarch brother. Being able to carry some ground vehicles and aerial vehicles was already something beyond the common knowledge of humans, let alone Primarchs. You had tried before, even the smallest Cobra-class destroyer could not be stored in your inventory, and even if a Cobra-class destroyer could be successfully stored by you, it would require 50,000 properly trained mortal crewmen or automatic servo robots to move it from its original position. Lionel Johnson, hearing your words, slowly nodded, and one of his large hands gently patted your thick shoulder armor. At this moment, after a slight hesitation, you also proposed to Lionel Johnson, whose face was impassive, either to use prayer for support as a circuitous route or to find a way to locate Lord Cypher, who could open a webway portal. What you meant by the circuitous route of prayer support was that you could choose a suitable time, and after completing the support, instead of returning, you would call your Typhoon fleet on the spot to resolve your current predicament. The only difficulty with this method was that you would have to abandon the remaining hundreds of thousands of mortal civilians on Karma's world, taking only a few combat-capable mortal teams and Blood Angels. To this, before you could finish your sentence, Lionel Johnson took a deep breath and resolutely rejected your method. He would absolutely not abandon these mortal civilians who had suffered so much. Even your plan to search for Lord Cypher's whereabouts on Karma's was completely ruined. However, just when you thought you would need to rack your brains to find another way to leave, Lionel Johnson, who had just returned to the mortal camp, immediately brought you a great surprise. You unexpectedly sensed surging psyker fluctuations from him, immediately concluding that the warp essence that had been brewing within Lionel Johnson for a long time was about to awaken. You immediately issued an order to the wolf cub, who was not beside you, through the communication channel, to assist the countless mortals in continuing to reinforce the defensive fortifications. Lionel Johnson, encountering this special situation for the first time, quickly led you, Zabriel, and 10 mortal lion guards towards the depths of the forest, away from the mortal camp. Because the combat memories from the Dark Angel's Legion's past eradication of numerous out-of-control psychers made Lionel Johnson extremely distrustful of psycher power itself. As your group continued to advance, the countless towering trees became increasingly silent and deep, and a heavy, damp, grayish-white mist began to permeate the depths of the thickets. You and Lionel Johnson instinctively exchanged glances. The tacit understanding between Primarch brothers immediately raised your vigilance, and you firmly gripped the close combat weapons in your large palms. You even felt as if you had returned to the depths of the Caliban forest, about to face countless Caliban beasts emerging from the darkness. But the next second, everything before their eyes seemed to undergo an indescribably drastic change. The numerous towering trees thinned out in the blink of an eye, and as the countless grayish-white mists disappeared, even the damp ground beneath their feet turned into a large expanse of dry, yellowish, coarse sand. At this moment, Lionel Johnson and the others, with furrowed brows, were undoubtedly filled with doubt and shock, but you, extremely sensitive to teleportation abilities and psyker fluctuations, immediately roared to Lionel Johnson beside you. Brother, the warp essence you have not yet fully controlled, whether in terms of combat or strategic significance, may far exceed our imagination. I suspect this must be a long-distance teleportation that disregards spatial distance. Because this is absolutely not Karma's world. Your excited words had just fallen. With a low roar of vehicle engines quickly reaching your ears, a slightly old-looking small off-road vehicle passed through the sparse trees and sped towards your direction. Hey, who are you? A middle-aged man driving the small off-road vehicle suddenly slammed on the brakes, his eyes filled with extreme vigilance as he shouted loudly at you. However, once the middle-aged man with messy hair and sand goggles clearly saw you and Lionel Johnson's towering physiques, the arrogance in his voice seemed to completely vanish. You and Lionel Johnson exchanged a silent glance, and Lionel Johnson, with no emotional fluctuations on his face, stepped forward, driving his power armor. Mortal, where is this place? I mean the world. Lionel Johnson asked, trying to sound amiable. Avalon. My Lord Angel. The middle-aged man stammered, seemingly having lost even the strength to get out of the small off-road vehicle. I am Lionel Johnson, Gene Seed Primarch of the Dark Angels. This is the Dark Side Regent of the Human Empire, Gene Seed Primarch of the Calamity Legion, my blood brother Luo Shaw, loyal son of the Emperor. If you trust us, I need to have a dialogue with the leader of this world. The tall and imposing Lionel Johnson looked down at the middle-aged man slumped on the ground, speaking each word slowly and gravely to him. The next moment, seeing the middle-aged man whose hands and feet were trembling slightly quickly dialing a communication channel to contact his superiors, you slowly exhaled. You did not contend with Lionel Johnson for leadership authority within the team. You even deliberately allowed Lionel Johnson, whose temperament had undergone significant changes, to have more contact with the outside world and more communication with mortals. After all, he had been away from the human empire for 10,000 years, and now many things in the entire empire, both in form and in handling, were completely different from 10,000 years ago. You believed that even with your Primarch brother assisting and guiding him, the current Lionel Johnson would need some time to fully integrate. Soon after, groups of ground vehicle convoys, stirring up rolling yellow sand, rushed frantically towards your location. You and the others, surrounded by countless fervent civilians, embarked on a long journey towards the capital city of Avalon, named Xerxes. After a not-so-long desert journey, you finally arrived at the center of power on Avalon, entering the Umbral Moon Palace within the capital of Xerxes. As your group stepped into the brightly lit, magnificent palace, countless weeping mortal civilians and National Defense Force guards knelt on one knee towards your group, and a female marshal named Haraga also opened her arms, welcoming your arrival with the local custom. However, slightly to your surprise, compared to the seemingly ancient Primarch before them, they seemed to trust your true identity as the Imperium Nihilus Regent even more. But this was also the formidable reputation indirectly brought about by your decades of leading the entire Calamity Legion fleet in countless support operations within Imperium Nihilus. For these mortal civilians who had endured endless suffering, they hardly knew the famous Lionel Johnson, and Regent Gilliman, far away, seemed too distant and vague. Instead, the legendary stories of a great god emperor's son walking among countless imperial worlds, saving many mortals, and eliminating all enemies of the empire, were more deeply ingrained in their hearts. After all, you, who constantly wore a set of light golden vibranium power armor, were impressive enough just by your appearance. Some extremely ignorant mortal believers even thought you were the incarnation of the great emperor. Thank you all for your support. Dark Side Regent, Avalon is all yours. Marshal Shalaga, temporarily acting as the planet's acting governor, immediately knelt on one knee before you, offering her loyalty. No, our team has only one leader, and that is my Primarch brother, the Gene Seed Primarch of the Dark Angels, Lionel Johnson. You calmly shook your head, and tendrils of dark shadow rapidly spread from your massive body, gently helping Marshal Shalaga, who had instinctively widened her eyes, up from the smooth floor. Mortal Governor, Avalon still belongs to you. I will not, nor do I wish to, rule this world. My only intention is to thoroughly purge the various defilements that prey on humanity across the stars. For this, I only ask that you hand over command authority of the local forces. Lionel Johnson, who had slightly shaken his head, spoke calmly to Marshal Shalaga, who looked puzzled. Subsequently, facing the respect and recognition from an ancient Primarch, Marshal Shalaga, willing in her heart, immediately handed over all command authority to Lionel Johnson. And after a more detailed conversation between you, you also learned that there were no Astartes battle groups stationed in this star system. But the good news was that a defense fleet belonging to Avalon was still intact, and they also had a large number of organized astropath squires waiting in the underground fortress. Therefore, after discussing with Lionel Johnson, you decided to use Avalon as a central hub to contact more isolated worlds, and at the same time, broadcast the momentous news of the Lion's return throughout the entire sector and even the warp. However, while allies craving leadership and support might learn of the Lion's return, the chaos in the warp would also become aware of it. You must accelerate the construction of more defensive fortifications and mobilize more combat resources until Avalon is successfully transformed into an impenetrable war fortress. And during this period, you also unexpectedly learned from the people of Avalon. Just a short while ago, a landing craft, belonging neither to Chaos nor Astartes, suddenly crashed onto the planet's surface. When a mortal convoy went to investigate, they found no trace of any life having been present within it. Upon hearing this, you remained noncommittal, your entire attention primarily focused on the allocation of resources and the deployment of combat personnel across the entire planet. However, Lionel Johnson, with a slight frown, sent Zabriel out after careful consideration, intending to conduct a more in-depth investigation. I suspect that this landing craft contained one of Zabriel's battle brothers, one of my bloodline descendants who escaped. After all, any Astartes could survive a landing craft crash, and the incredibly complex buildings of the Xerxes capital are sufficient to conceal an Astartes trying to hide. At this moment, Lionel Johnson, taking a deep breath, spoke calmly in your direction. You slowly raised your head, seeing a ray of scorching sunlight from Avalon obliquely shining through the bright windows of the vast palace onto his slightly reflective bald head. In fact, this is an inexplicable intuition or the silent guidance of some power, just as I suddenly awakened to what is called the warp essence. I suspect that our father is secretly arranging some things, allowing me to find more of my descendants, or rather, the loyal descendants who were present when Caliban was destroyed. At this moment, you seemed to can't help but grin, and then you continued to lower your head and issue dense command orders. Whether it was you, or the returned Regent Gilliman, or the recently returned Lionel Johnson. All of you were now important pieces arranged by the Emperor on the entire chessboard. Your only mission as Primarchs was to slow down the decay and corruption of the human empire and the entire human race, or to find an opportunity for a complete turnaround. Approximately 1 day later, Zabriel's low voice was quickly transmitted to your and Lionel Johnson's communication channels. He had indeed found the fallen angels hiding in the Xerxes capital, but not one as Lionel Johnson had thought, but 3. The next moment, Lionel Johnson, who was briefly resting, immediately drove his power armor and rose from the ground. This was not because the people of Avalon were unwilling to prepare a bed for the esteemed Primarch, but because few standard furniture pieces could withstand the weight of a Primarch's trampling. You also temporarily put down the 90% completed deployment and allocation tasks, intending to follow Lionel Johnson to see the fallen angels. Thump, thump, thump. Just a moment later, you and the emotionally stable Lionel Johnson met the three tall fallen angels, clad in black power armor, in a mortal garden. You successfully witnessed a touching scene of reconciliation between loyal descendants and their gene father. Even though one seemingly furious fallen angel repeatedly launched awe-inspiring attacks at Lionel Johnson, the calm Lionel Johnson did not choose to retaliate, but instead chose to completely move his bloodline descendants with sincere words. However, the series of good news that followed did not last long. When the astropaths of the Avalon world conducted repeated psychic broadcasts throughout the sector, you did not wait for the arrival of allies from surrounding star systems, but instead directly met the thunderous descent of the aggressive The Thousand Eyes warband Chaos ships. In the cold void, 189 Chaos ships of varying sizes directly confronted the Avalon Defense Fleet, which had only 90 ships of varying sizes. 16 of the Chaos Warband's main combat fleets, without any hesitation, passed through the dense laser fire and brilliant light spears, launching an extremely frantic assault on your only 4 main combat ships. In fact, if this Chaos Invasion war had not been personally overseen by you and Lionel Johnson, then the entire Avalon would inevitably have become another unfortunate Imperial world to fall. But now you are on Avalon, silently waiting for the right moment to launch a fatal counterattack. At this moment, you, with your eyes slightly closed, took a deep breath. You slowly opened your eyes, and then suddenly drove your vibranium power armor to stand up. Lionel Johnson, whose aged face wore a very solemn expression, also cast his gaze upon your massive body, from which large amounts of dark shadow continuously emanated. Brother, this time I will demonstrate to you the special combat style and true destructive power after the complete awakening of the warp essence. Of course, the warp essence I am currently using is Corax's shadow power. You, gradually transforming into a raven-headed, human-bodied liberation form, spoke calmly to Lionel Johnson, who couldn't help but widen his eyes. Wait a moment, I'll be right back. Thank you for your support. Lionel Johnson, with a solemn expression, slowly maneuvered his power armor to the center of the flagship's bridge. His pre-battle speech, delivered with utmost sincerity, successfully rallied Avalon's entire defense fleet and calmed the anxious fears of countless mortals. Following this, Lionel Johnson's deep voice gradually echoed through every open communication channel, even reaching the planet's surface. Lion. Countless roars from mortal warriors and civilians, strained and hoarse, resounded throughout the entire desert world. Your massive body stood in the cold warp on the outer deck, and you subconsciously rotated your enormous raven head, which was formed from a vast amount of shadow power. You seemed to sense the gradually coalescing, unyielding faith and the desperate resolve of countless mortals to defend their homes. Or perhaps this was merely a slight illusion brought to you by the overly active psychic power within your colossal body. You took a deep breath through the nose and mouth hidden within your massive raven head. You slowly raised an immense shadow claw, its palm aimed directly at the deeper, colder warp, at the Chaos ships launching their terrifying assault. Boom! Instantly, a pillar of divine power, radiating brilliant energy but distinctly not Chaos psychic power, suddenly erupted from the flagship's outer deck. An even larger, ethereal dragon head slowly emerged from within the pillar of divine power, opening its colossal mouth in a silent, terrifying roar. At this moment, you used the T-Online Divine Beast as the vanguard of the entire space battlefield, initiating a single-person ship-breaking frenzy against the surging Chaos fleet. In fact, if judging solely by large-scale destructive power, neither the loyal Primarchs nor the traitor Primarchs could compare to you. Even without awakening your warp essence, simply by utilizing the special power from native Terra, you were the most destructive among the many Primarchs. You vigorously manipulated the incredibly massive T-Online Divine Beast, swinging its colossal claws back and forth, successfully overloading the void shield of a medium-sized Chaos ship. When the T-Online Divine Beast, having initiated its own attack, turned its direction and lunged directly towards the next Chaos ship, you, in your warp-liberated state of raven-headed human form, forcefully rushed into the Chaos ship, piercing through the entire metal hull in mere tens of seconds. And within the chaotic Chaos ship, Countless chaos cultists and chaos demons were twisted and torn apart by the dark shadow power you unleashed, becoming stepping stones on your path to victory. The next second, you, having successfully condensed from your swarm of ravens form into a raven-headed human form, immediately changed direction, your massive body swiftly flying into the T-Online divine beast, and continuing your previous mode of operation, successively destroying the next chaos ship. At the same time, Avalon's defense fleet, fully mobilized by Lionel Johnson, immediately launched a far greater fire coverage than the Chaos Fleet could have imagined. Countless arrays of lances and laser arrays fired brilliant energy beams, mixed with a large number of space torpedoes, almost obscuring the surrounding cold warp. Normally, such a degree of fire coverage would only be initiated when the fleets of both sides were engaged in more desperate combat. However, Lionel Johnson did the opposite, employing a command tactic that almost defied conventional wisdom, causing the numerous Chaos Fleet to lose one-third of its Chaos ships on the spot. And by the time you, relying on the T-Online Divine Beast in your warp-liberated state, directly confronted a flagship within the Chaos Fleet, the Nova Cannon from Avalon's defense fleet also resolved a major combat hidden danger for you, preventing you from being ambushed by more Chaos ships. Thus, the originally aggressive Chaos Fleet was immediately suppressed by you and Lionel Johnson. Countless Chaos ships became nothing more than metal debris floating in the cold warp before they could even exert their true combat effectiveness. What surprised you and Lionel Johnson the most was that as this space naval battle continued, a pirate fleet from the star systems surrounding Avalon also arrived on the battlefield to provide support, putting the Chaos Fleet in the awkward position of being attacked from both front and back. Therefore, when various favorable conditions were combined, it was only a matter of time before this outnumbered space naval battle achieved final glory and the remaining Chaos Fleet was completely routed. Approximately 9 hours later, the Chaos Fleet, with only 50 Chaos ships remaining, was forced to risk a warp jump, fleeing in disarray from the cold warp. This also signified an unimaginably glorious victory for Avalon's defense fleet in this space battle. You successfully returned to the flagship's outer deck, relying on the fading T-Online Divine Beast. You alone completely destroyed 6 of the Chaos Fleet's flagships, with countless ordinary medium and small Chaos ships also destroyed. However, even though those currently following Lionel Johnson were not Dark Angel's Astartes, countless mortal crew members successfully demonstrated the First Legion's Master's Command talent, becoming the backbone of the force that defeated the Chaos Fleet. And just as you and Lionel Johnson began discussing the next course of action for everyone, the pirate fleet that had previously supported you also sent a request for a meeting. When Zabriel, as Lionel Johnson's close aide, boarded their ship, he brought back 2 Dark Angels wearing black power armor to Lionel Johnson. You and Lionel Johnson were somewhat surprised by this, because one of them was a member of the Inner Circle, Galad, who had personally followed Lionel Johnson in the Rangdan Xenocides. This was a true veteran elite of the Inner Circle from the First Legion era, not like Israel's group of Inner Circle fanatics who only knew how to squabble amongst themselves. So, Lionel Johnson personally met with the 2 Dark Angels and successfully gained their loyalty. Over the next period, you and Lionel Johnson each led a portion of the defense fleet to reclaim surrounding star systems. Meanwhile, Zabriel began diligently searching for more Dark Angels, following the rumors and secret whispers circulating within each world. When you saw him again, you realized that, including the few Astartes already found, Lionel Johnson now had 20 elite veterans who had endured countless trials. But then, bad news from the Wolf Cub and the Blood Angels immediately diverted your attention, bringing your gaze back to the fleeing the Thousand Eyes warband. Thank you for your support. If the Camus of the past, after being purified, could have once again served as a home world for mortals to recuperate, then, based on the doomsday scene you observed from low Earth orbit alone, Camus, having just undergone an extermination-level orbital bombardment, not only had its crust shattered, but countless scorching lava flows were also rampant, making it seem beyond salvation. What angered you and Lionel Johnson even more was that of the hundreds of thousands of mortal civilians on Camus, only tens of thousands were successfully rescued by you. In fact, if it weren't for the wolf cub, who, to prevent similar situations, had dug out a large number of underground shelters beneath the mortal camps in advance. Then it's estimated that you wouldn't have been able to rescue a single mortal, and it would even be questionable whether the wolf cub and others would have survived. 18 annihilators that launched a sneak attack were personally shattered by me. The leading Chaos Astartes said that Seraphax, the master of the Thousand Eyes warband, is waiting for the Lionel Johnson to arrive on a world called Saipo, and the extermination operation on Camus was merely an invitation letter. The wolf cub, gritting his teeth, while moving his vibranium arm stained with chaos blood, said in a deep voice to you and Lionel Johnson. Hearing his words, you slowly took a deep breath. You immediately drove your vibranium power armor, turned, and looked at Zabriel, whose expression was becoming increasingly cold, and Lionel Johnson, who stood silently beside him. It's obvious that this is a trap set by them, and it might even be some conspiracy orchestrated by the Chaos Gods. Brother, what do you think? You said faintly to Lionel Johnson. Since they've invited me, it would be too impolite not to go and brave it. I don't think any trap can stop the two of us Primarch brothers working together, can it? Lionel Johnson suddenly drew Loyalty, the master-grade power sword that had been hanging at his power armor's waist, and his other huge hand gripped the plasma weapon named Flowing Light. This was a precious treasure personally gifted to Lionel Johnson by Marshal Shalaga, rumored to be an ancient sidearm once left by the Emperor on the world of Avalon. But unfortunately, with the loss of many records and the passage of time, no one can now ascertain its authenticity. Even Lionel Johnson only believed that this ancient firearm was merely a beautiful wish of the Avalon people. You slowly nodded to Lionel Johnson. You did not refuse the Primarch brothers' invitation to battle. You intended to give the arrogant master of the Thousand Eyes warband a little Primarch shock together. Soon after, the reassembled Avalon defense fleet quickly began intermittent warp voyages towards the world named Saipo. Because Imperium Nihilus had completely lost the continuous illumination from the Astronomicon of Terra, countless navigators had to re-adapt to navigating without the Astronomicon. Fortunately, Psykers under the Human Empire, regardless of their status or position, are an extremely adaptable species. Buzz buzz buzz. As time slowly passed, after countless short-distance warp voyages, the Avalon Defense Fleet finally entered the star system where the Saipo world was located. You and Lionel Johnson, standing inside the bridge, immediately detected strange signals from numerous Chaos ships via the ship's auspex. In addition, you, having just brought up the holographic image, also saw an octagonal Chaos emblem, about several kilometers in diameter, in the cold void. And if the detection instruments on the ship were not mistaken, this was absolutely a chaos ritual constructed from the mortal skeletons of the entire star system. You seemed to have no emotional fluctuations about this, only your eyes became colder. Lionel Johnson, with little emotional change on his aged face, also seemed fine, but the subtle grinding sound of his teeth still betrayed the Lionel Johnson's inner feelings. This is one of the reasons why everyone in the human empire has no mercy for Chaos and Xenos. In the eyes of Chaos and Xenos, humans can be tools, toys, or food, but they will never be living beings. Next, the Avalon Defense Fleet, following your and Lionel Johnson's plan, launched guerrilla tactics to provide more assistance for your, Lionel Johnson's, and the Wolf Cub's descent onto the Saipo world. Once most of the Chaos Fleet had its attention drawn by the Defense Fleet, you, Lionel Johnson, and others, fully armed, utilized the forest path that he had gradually mastered through meditation, traversing the lingering echoes of the Caliban forest to reach the surface of the Saipo world. This ability to teleport, completely disregarding spatial distance and remaining unhindered, undoubtedly gave Lionel Johnson a threat level far beyond many Primarchs. Whether facing independent combat or large-scale battlefields, Lionel Johnson is now almost invincible. Thump thump thump. However, as soon as you all appeared from the forest path, you were heavily surrounded by an uncountable number of beastmen amidst a chorus of roars. At this moment, the wolf cub, gripping the breaker warhammer in his gigantic palm, was the first to drive his power armor into a charge. His vibranium arm, hanging at his side, instantly transformed like living metal into a metal serrated whip, over 10 meters long, reaping the lives of numerous beastmen like a meat grinder. Following closely, the Dark Angels and Blood Angels, one by one, drew their melee weapons and raised their vibranium energy shields, launching impressive combat charges. Your and Lionel Johnson's massive bodies did not immediately engage in frenzied slaughter. You were secretly vigilant of all movements from the Thousand Eyes warband. Thump thump thump. Indeed, not long after, a wizard lord, wearing ancient power armor and a chaos robe over his tall body, slowly revealed his terrifying figure. "Allow me to assist you, Father, and the renowned Lord of Calamity, Luo Sha, has also arrived here. It is truly an honor." This chaos wizard, with half of his face and head engulfed in flames, said faintly to you. The strange sight in your field of vision made you instinctively narrow your eyes. If it weren't for the complete absence of normal psychic fluctuations from his sturdy body, you might even have mistaken him for an Astartes who had just begun to embark on the path of redemption of the Cursed Legion. Seraphax, I knew that name sounded vaguely familiar. So you are indeed my offspring, but you still chose to fall. Lionel Johnson, his expression growing colder, without any hesitation, raised, flowing light, tightly clutched in his palm and fiercely pulled the trigger. Thank you for your support. Countless beastmen let out deafening roars and howls. Their flesh-mutated chaos bodies were either blasted apart by bolters or cleaved open by swinging power swords. The plasma orbs that Lionel Johnson instantly shot out were completely blocked by an invisible and heavy psychic shield the moment they reached Seraphax. You saw the Chaos Sorcerer Lord, whose half-face and head were burning with raging fire, smile coldly at Lionel Johnson. He then activated his ancient power armor and quickly fled backward. Lionel Johnson, clutching his sword of loyalty in his massive hand, took heavy steps without any hesitation. He tracked his prey like a ruthless and experienced hunter. You were about to activate your vibranium power armor and move with Lionel Johnson. You immediately saw burly annihilators, their flesh-twisted chaos bodies swaying, enter your field of vision. You slightly shook your skull helmet and slowly took a deep breath through your mouth and nose. The blood scythe in your massive hand suddenly trembled, and your enormous body, accompanied by a low rumble, lunged toward the large number of annihilators. You must eliminate them before they can unleash large-scale firepower. The number of Astartes under you and Lionel Johnson was already small. It would be a losing battle for them to fight alongside two Primarchs only to die here. Moreover, as a Primarch, you did not believe that a mere Chaos Sorcerer Lord required you and Lionel Johnson to use your full strength, even if this was a trap that he had meticulously planned for a long time. Click, click, click. The blood scythe in your massive hand glowed green, its sharp edge cleaving through the massive chaos bodies of the annihilators. Before more mutated muzzles on the annihilators could aim at the front of your massive body, the large amount of dark shadow wrapped around your body instantly transformed into shadow clones, tearing a dozen roaring annihilators into bloody fragments. At the same time, the wolf cub, wielding a breaker warhammer and a living metal whip, also joined your battle. The wolf cub, whose physical strength was already comparable to yours, violently slammed 3 annihilators with shattered heads to the ground in succession, and his suddenly extended living metal whip instantly bound 5 annihilators firmly in place. Seeing more than 20 annihilators eliminated in an instant, the remaining few annihilators and a large number of beastmen no longer posed much of a threat to your team. You immediately gave brief instructions to the wolf cub and Zabriel, then activated your vibranium power armor and sped toward Lionel Johnson. You quickly passed through a large, chaos-corrupted ruined forest and entered a cluster of ancient palaces that had been damaged for a long time. Hundreds of beastmen and chaos cultists occasionally leapt out of the shadow, attempting to ambush, but were instantly ground into countless white bones by the dark shadow power you casually flung at them. You would also unexpectedly step into some chaos sorcery traps that seemed to have been personally set by Seraphax. However, you, who were now more like a melee sorcerer, were extremely sensitive to psychic fluctuations, and the shadow armor that suddenly appeared on the surface of your massive body was enough to counteract a large amount of chaos sorcery, so his minor tricks were not worth mentioning to you. Soon after, you activated your vibranium power armor and arrived in front of a castle of even grander architectural scale. You immediately saw a magnificent gate that Lionel Johnson had forcibly destroyed. You immediately activated your vibranium power armor, stepped forward, and entered the interior of the massive castle. You cautiously and quickly traversed a silence corridor where the ground and walls were covered with blasphemous runes and foul blood. The moment you took a heavy step and entered an empty room similar to a throne hall, Lionel Johnson, whose massive body was temporarily bound by countless metal chains, appeared in your field of vision. You also noticed a very large silver mirror reflecting everything below from the ceiling of the entire room. No need to struggle, my father. These metal chains are primarily made of the iron elements from countless mortals, sacrificed with their flesh and souls as the furnace fire. You might be able to break free with brute force, but I believe the resilience chaos has bestowed upon it is enough to bind the Emperor's extraordinary creation. Seraphax, his massive body suspended in midair, said to Lionel Johnson with a half-smile. You instinctively tightened your grip on the blood scythe in your massive hand, and the dark shadow flickering on the surface of your massive body seemed to foreshadow your impending action. However, Seraphax seemed to have no fear of your arrival. He looked down at you, then said in a deep voice to you and Lionel Johnson. Primarchs, wake up. The entire Milky Way galaxy is fragmented, the corrupt empire is merely a facade, and there is no hope except for Abaddon's endless great crusade. Humanity's fire will eventually burn out, and the cold stars will be reoccupied by the alien mongrels we annihilated 10,000 years ago. A mere chaos sorcerer lord cannot stop any of this, nor can you, even as Primarchs. Because there is only one person in this world who can do it, and that is the Emperor. At this moment, Seraphax's deep voice, suspended in midair, grew increasingly fanatical, and even the raging fire between his half-face and head seemed to burn even more intensely. The chaotic warp has told me many things, some of which are not credible, but some are genuinely true. One of the human empire's many mistakes was to imprison the human's master on the golden throne. If he could truly die, then the high heavens would be turned upside down. And what I must do now is choose one of you two Primarchs as a parasitic vessel. I will use your power to personally free the Emperor on the golden throne from the shackles of his shattered body and set him on the great path to becoming a true god of the high heavens. 4 of the high heavens' 8 divine positions are already taken, and our human's master will become the 5th. He will descend upon the Milky Way with overwhelming destructive power, eliminate countless alien races, and lead humanity to another great crusade. At this moment, Seraphax's futuristic fantasy continuously echoed throughout the empty room. However, as soon as his words fell, a low chuckle from you completely interrupted all of the Master of 1,000 Eyes movements. PFF'd. You, what are you laughing at? Seraphax asked, looking down at you with an extremely gloomy expression. Nothing, I just suddenly remembered something happy. You also said to him with a very sincere expression. Helping the Emperor break free from the Golden Throne's shackles and pain, to become the 5th Chaos Gods in the warp, that was once a crazy idea you had. However, as time slowly passed, the more you saw and the more you understood about the warp, the more you despised your past shallowness. Once the Emperor ascends to godhood from the high heavens in his current half-dead state, then his remaining humanity would inevitably vanish, and you wouldn't even dare to imagine what would return from the warp. Most importantly, if the Emperor unfortunately became a god, then Holy Terra would certainly become a second Eye of Terror. At that time, it's likely that humans spread throughout the entire Milky Way galaxy would instantly become chaos sacrifices for the other side, and a large number of Astartes would even become cursed demons. You should know that the human empire does not have a webway for hiding and resisting. Successfully replicating the Eldar's lingering existence is an impossible task. Even if most of you Primarchs, who are most deeply connected to the Emperor, would likely become chaos great demons or lesser gods, Having enjoyed the freedom of the real universe, you would probably find it very difficult to adapt to the high heavens constraints. To be honest, I once had that idea too, but later I had long discussions and exchanges with my brothers, and we ultimately discovered it was a dead end, a one-way road that would completely doom the human race beyond redemption. You slightly tilted your head back, gazing at Seraphax through your helmet's eye lenses as you spoke. Do you believe you've found a goal that even the Primarchs couldn't imagine? Do you think you're the sole lone hero who knows the truth? This is where chaos corruption is most insidious. It subtly twists your thoughts and will, making you believe you are fighting for humanity and the Emperor, but in reality, everything you do is merely a strand of spider silk casually flicked by the chaos gods. You continued to speak, gazing at Seraphax, whose facial expression was becoming increasingly distorted. The moment your words fell silent, Seraphax, whose massive body was suspended in midair, suddenly swung the hand clutching his chaos scepter. Terrifying chaos psychic power surged, unleashing powerful chaos sorcery that crashed down towards you. He who disturbs my mind, even a Primarch can be slain, he shrieked madly. You shook your head slightly. Vast amounts of dark shadow power rapidly emanating from your massive body suddenly erupted, transforming into flocks of shadowy ravens that swept through the surrounding air. At the same time, the metal 10 rings silently detached from your thick arms, instantly streaking through the air and flying rapidly towards Lionel Johnson's location. In an instant, the entire empty room seemed to be divided in two by your shadow power ravens and Seraphax's chaos sorcery. And as time passed, your shadow power ravens were rapidly gaining the upper hand. Crack, crack, crack. Just then, Lionel Johnson skillfully manipulated the metal 10 rings, forcefully destroying the unbreakable metal chains. His massive body knelt on the ground, the ancient firearm clutched in his huge palm glowing as he repeatedly pulled the trigger towards the silver mirror on the ceiling. The next second, rapidly moving plasma spheres instantly melted large sections of the silver mirror, and countless streams of scalding, boiling silver liquid poured directly onto Seraphax's entire head. The opponent, whose massive body was trembling, couldn't help but let out a piercing, tragic shriek. The raging fire, which had originally only covered half of his face and head, instantly enveloped his entire head, making the current Seraphax look even more like a chaos demon. You fools! You've not only ruined me. You've ruined yourselves, and the future of the entire Milky Way galaxy. At this moment, under your cold gaze, Seraphax, still suspended in midair, suddenly extended a pair of massive wings, interwoven with blue and silver, from behind his ancient power armor. Following this, increasingly terrifying chaos psychic power fluctuations continuously erupted from his mutated, massive body. However, at this moment, Lionel Johnson, gripping the sword of loyalty in his palm, suddenly activated his power armor and leapt from the ground. In the mid-air, where countless chaos psychic power fluctuations and dark shadow power intertwined and clashed, individual Caliban forests, shrouded in gray-white mist, seemed to rise from the ground. The next second, Lionel Johnson, gripping the sword of loyalty in his massive palm, completely concealed his enormous figure within the true illusions of the many Caliban forests. Then, like a ghost appearing and disappearing unpredictably, he arrived behind Seraphax's massive body. Thud! The power sword, named Loyalty, imbued with the Lionel Johnson's immense strength, forcefully pierced through Seraphax's power armor shell, embedding itself deep into his back. At the same time, you, who had suddenly increased the flow of dark shadow power, also propelled your vibranium power armor, stomping hard on the broken ground. The blood scythe, raised high above your head, whistled with an extremely piercing sound as it heavily cleaved into Seraphax's blazing, fiery head. Even though the current Seraphax was undergoing a terrifying transformation towards becoming a Chaos Demon Prince, facing the combined assault of two powerful Primarchs who had awakened their warp essence, even if the Lord of Change himself had descended upon this place, he would surely have met a bitter end. Boom! Your massive body and Lionel Johnson's landed on the ground almost simultaneously, your magnetic boots sinking deep into the earth, scattering countless gravel and dust. Immediately after, Seraphax, whose heart had been brutally pierced by the sword of loyalty and whose entire massive body had been completely split in two, crashed heavily onto the ground. Your gaze fixed on the Chaos Demon Prince, whose shattered flesh was rapidly dissipating, and you instinctively let out a sigh. Alas, another unfortunate soul lured and corrupted by the grand scheme. It's just that now, madmen harboring similar ideas are probably everywhere throughout the human empire. At this moment, Lionel Johnson, slowly retracting the sword of loyalty, seemed to have no intention of speaking. He slightly shifted his cold gaze, looking towards a fallen angel whose tall figure had just appeared at the entrance. My son, do you also agree with Seraphax's mad idea? Thank you for your support. Chapter 946, Sassian Meninges, Lionel Johnson's Loyalty. You watched as the Dark Angel's scion, Bella, stepped into the empty room. Through your acute sense of smell, you detected a faint stench of chaos and flesh mutation emanating from him. You tightened your grip on the blood scythe, which was still dripping viscous blood. If Lionel Johnson were to unexpectedly show mercy, then you would act in his stead. However, to your surprise, he had not come to help Seraphax fulfill his wish, nor had he ever begged for mercy from the two Primarchs. You saw Bella, who had chosen to converse with Lionel Johnson in a low voice, slowly kneel before his Gene father, before Lionel Johnson, his expression growing colder, decapitated him with a single sword stroke. He might have been a good son, but he followed Seraphax for too long. Both his consciousness and body have been corrupted beyond recognition by chaos, he was merely asking his father for death. Lionel Johnson, his massive body standing still, slowly spoke to you with his back turned. His voice was incredibly low, yet it subtly contained a faint sadness from personally destroying his own bloodline. You had few comforting words that could completely uplift the disheartened Lionel Johnson. This was a crucial responsibility that you, as Primarchs and Gene Fathers, had to face and bear, for better or worse. Soon after, the war and arrogant conspiracy ignited by the Thousand Eyes Warband were completely stillborn. The entire Saipo world was swiftly purged by you, with almost every inch of ground scorched by flamethrowers. And with the complete demise of Chaos Sorcerer Lord Seraphax, more Chaos Warlords affiliated with the Thousand Eyes Warband either fled back to the warp or had their heads taken by you and Lionel Johnson working together. During this time, Lionel Johnson, in his quest to fully grasp the essence of the warp, unexpectedly entered the previously unknown space through meditation. According to his description to you, he engaged in fierce battles with more manifested false Primarchs and successfully acquired a diamond-shaped kite shield that once belonged to the Emperor himself. Your first reaction upon hearing this was that all of this was a series of trials arranged by the Emperor for the returning Lionel Johnson. Even your encounter with Lionel Johnson better helped the Lionel Johnson himself gradually integrate into the current human empire, taking on the difficult tasks that inherently belonged to him. For the next period, you and the Wolf Cub began leading Avalon's defense fleet, ranging far and wide, with the Avalon world as the central point, expanding the Imperial territory controlled by Lionel Johnson to encompass the entire sector. You successively found more fallen angels who had come to ascertain if the Lionel Johnson had truly returned, but you never found any trace of Lord Cypher. At this moment, you also vaguely sensed that the time limit for you and the Wolf Cub to remain was approaching. You then briefed Lionel Johnson on most of your contingencies left in Imperium Nihilus, including but not limited to the locations of various strategic material reserve planets, the Raven Guard Company's intelligence network, and several Forge worlds closely related to the Calamity Legion, among other top-secret information. You even intended to temporarily transfer the authority of the Dark Side Regent to Lionel Johnson, but he ruthlessly refused. Thump thump thump. Once everything was briefed, you and the Wolf Cub slowly piloted your vibranium power armor into an empty and secluded ship compartment. At this moment, Lionel Johnson, his massive body unmoving, silently watched your every move from across the way. Lionel Johnson, once I return to the fleet, I will send you a portion of the main fleet and an Astartes company. By then, the Dark Angels will surely know of your return, and they will definitely come to find you, their gene father. This way, you will have a decent fighting force under your command. You spoke to Lionel Johnson with a calm expression. Brother Luo Shaw, then we shall meet again next time, for the war across the galaxy is endless, and thank you, for making me realize that I am not alone now, that you and Gilliman exist. Lionel Johnson, slowly nodding, said to you in a deep voice. Actually, I also have one, never mind, this is not important, let's talk about it next time. You, who were about to reveal information about Perturabo, abruptly cut off your unfinished words. You had wanted to say more to Lionel Johnson as a farewell. But your massive bodies, which were gradually beginning to dissipate, also made you murmur. Previous avatars either lived or died completely. This is the first time one has dissipated on its own. You finally nodded heavily to Lionel Johnson nearby, as a farewell gesture. Your consciousness completely fell into endless darkness. You quickly returned to the normal timeline. This simulation has ended, time unknown. The retainable options for this simulation are as follows. 1. Loyalty and Flowing Light, Power Sword and Plasma Weapon Replica. Note: this is a precious weapon set that Lionel Johnson successively obtained from the Emperor, symbolizing a father's fervent love for his aging son. Note: in fact, even the Power Sword, Loyalty, which appears unremarkable in its overall appearance, the metal material and forging techniques used to create it were an inexplicable mystery, most likely originating from the Emperor's own imperial treasury. As for the indestructible plasma weapon, Flowing Light, it was indeed an ancient weapon accidentally lost by the Emperor when he set foot on the Avalon world, perhaps a common weapon from the Golden Age. Note: friend, you wouldn't want to see your brother without a handy weapon, would you? Anyway, even if you get it, you'll just collect it, so why don't I just intercept a past phantom from the timeline? The Emperor doesn't object to this. A Chaos Gods who consistently refused to reveal his name mumbled incoherently. 2. Lionel Johnson's Glory, Emperor's Kite Shield Replica. Note: this is a diamond-shaped kite shield bestowed upon Lionel Johnson by the Emperor himself. Note: this is less a shield and more a shoulder accessory on the Emperor's armor. Although it's inexplicable how massive the Emperor's own physique would be if measured by this shield, it symbolizes how important Lionel Johnson's return is to the Emperor. Note: friend, do you want a complete set of Emperor's armor? Just sacrifice any Terminator to gather a fragment. Don't miss this opportunity, a deranged Chaos Gods continued to mumble to you. 3. Sassian Meninges, Lionel Johnson's Loyalty Primarch. Note: this is a replica of a Primarch organ gradually replicated from Lionel Johnson's Sassian Meninges cells, indistinguishable from the original Primarch organ in both function and form. Note: it seems to have been enhanced and blessed by the Emperor, and touched slightly by an unknown Chaos Gods. Note: after this flattened circular organ is successfully implanted into your cerebral cortex, it will rapidly grow deep within your entire brain before complete fusion. Therefore, you will fully master the process of suspended animation that Lionel Johnson once experienced without the need for corresponding long-term training and repeated chemical stimulation. The presence of Sassian Meninges allows your entire body to enter a special state of suspended animation and recovery. The only issue is that if you unexpectedly suffer a fatal injury capable of threatening a Primarch, the recovery time will be quite long. In addition, Lionel Johnson's blessing and power are also contained within it, requiring you to discover them yourself. Note: from today onwards, there will be no more so-called fallen angels in the entire galaxy. My bloodline, you shall be called forgiven angels. Lionel Johnson, facing a large number of Dark Angels scions, shouted in a deep voice with his back to you and Gilliman. Note: the Emperor is not home recently. Please find me if you have anything. An yin-yang star, whose overall appearance resembles a black hole, is rampaging deep within the warp. Countless warp creatures unable to escape have completely become its nourishment. Thank you for your support. Chapter 947, Chaos Spawn and the Excited Cipher. After the simulation ended, under the silent gaze of the young Wolfen and the newly awakened Cipher, Rogel swiftly completed the selection of simulation rewards. In the next second, Rogel, feeling a slight stinging sensation and the growth of flesh deep within his brain, successfully completed the implantation and growth of the Sassanid meninges, adding a significant layer of confidence to his many life-saving measures. Speaking of which Primarchs have I not yet encountered? Ferrus, Khan, Lorgar, Vulcan, and of course, the more important Horus. Magnus goes without saying. Judging from his hateful attitude towards me, I must have already had a fierce battle with him in the past. As for Perturabo, I'm afraid I caused his ascension to demonhood after being seriously wounded. Perhaps not every Primarch simulation represents an enhancement surgery. Or is there some hidden secret I don't know about? Right, the Rogel, who will become the 6th Chaos God in the future, seems to be influencing my past and present. He seems to control powerful forces like time. Could his involvement be why the simulator was created? At this moment, Rogel, slowly opening his eyes, thought silently. He estimated that with the birth of the 6th Chaos God, the situation within the warp would become even more chaotic. Otherwise, the Chaos Gods would definitely find some amusement with him, this Primarch. However, today, the Doomed Legion faces conventional battles, and large-scale wars and chaos incursions seem to have been quiet for a long time. In addition, Rogel also felt that his Primarch physique was gradually becoming perfect. Even if some non-essential enhancement surgery procedures were missing, he estimated that his overall combat power in the future would not be weakened much. Just as Rogel, squinting his eyes, had countless thoughts rapidly spinning in his mind. Cypher, who had been frowning and silent since just now, suddenly took a deep breath. He turned to the young Wolfen and the Primarch and said, "My experience this time was different from yours. The Emperor seemed to have sent me to the past to carry out a secret mission, but because he didn't give overly direct orders, my entire operation was completely messed up." As soon as Cypher's words fell, Rogel and the young Wolfen turned their gazes together, staring at Cypher's familiar face, which was slightly anxious. He paused for a moment, then slowly said, "I was directly thrown by the Emperor to Armageddon in the past, which is the holy land of countless orc greenskins. Ullinar, there, I accidentally encountered a strange Astartes who was mixed up with a weak greenskin. The relationship between the two seemed very harmonious, without any hostility. The other party's physique was very burly, comparable to that of Tiberius and others. In terms of combat style, he was more like a Primaris Astartes. If it weren't for the fact that the other party didn't have a face like you and me, I would even have thought it was another surviving clone brother. And my original target was that weak greenskin who is now called Shatterer of Skulls, Slaka, by the Imperium of Man. The Emperor seemed to want me to solve some of the orc problems once and for all. However, some mishaps occurred one after another in the following encounters and battles, which caused the relationship between me and that strange Astartes to completely fall to freezing point. The other party began to forcibly prevent me from killing the unground Shatterer of Skulls. Just after I tried my best to chop off half of Shatterer of Skull's skull, the increasingly angry strange Astartes actually took out a relic belonging to Vulcan. Brothers, I swear I definitely won't admit it wrong, that should be one of Vulcan's artifacts called the Obsidian Chariot, a super-mechanical creation that can be transformed into any heavy vehicle at will. I lost, and was directly bombarded into bloody wreckage by a large area of firepower. Originally, this was nothing, just accepting the bet and admitting defeat, but when my consciousness gradually rose into the air, I seemed to see more future scenarios. That strange Astartes actually gradually became one of the greenskin warlords of the surviving Shatterer of Skulls, Slaka. The other party even secretly assisted Shatterer of Skulls in successfully obtaining the blessing of Gork and Mork. And I also discovered that Emir Astartes can actually use the Wog field of the greenskin orcs. As soon as Cypher Rogel's words fell, Rogel, without waiting for the young Wolfen to ask the other party in depth, suddenly said, "Are you so sure that this secret mission was sent to you by the Emperor? I am now somewhat suspicious that Rogel did something in it." At this moment, Cypher, hearing Rogel's deep words, was slightly stunned. He gasped, muttering to himself, "Primarch, are you saying?" Rogel, shaking his head slightly, said with a sneer. I don't know what the Emperor wants to do, why not prevent the other party in advance, but the simulation experience and even prayer support we face next needs to be more cautious. Since the Emperor can have our batch of helpers, then why can't others have more clones? Otherwise, where did so many time remnants we encountered come from? Even if the other party can fail countless times, creating endless time remnants, as long as it succeeds once, it is the birth of a powerful helper. Because we all know how difficult it is to deal with after we become bad guys. Rogel's words gradually made the faces of the young Wolfen and Cypher become ugly. If the most troublesome thing for them before was the blessings and corruption from the Chaos Gods, then now they may also have to face some of themselves who have already stood on the opposite side. I think we need more evidence to corroborate the truth of this guess. It just so happens that the Lion has successfully returned. Cypher, you led 1/3 of the Doomed Legion fleet, as well as a part of the Astartes companies, to find Lionel Johnson and support his subsequent actions. By the way, mobilize the fallen angels you control to see if you can find the Astartes who has defected to the Greenskins. If the other party is indeed a chaos spawn of Rogel, then kill them without mercy. Rogel, rapidly turning his thoughts, issued a series of orders to Cypher in front of him. And Cypher, who had just accepted the Primarch's order, was first shocked by the return of Lionel Johnson, and then the solemn-looking other party stood up without hesitation, driving the power armor. I never thought that the Lion would return to the Empire at this moment. I must personally send the Lion sword back to the Primarch's hand. This is my duty and mission as Lord Cypher. As soon as the words fell, Cypher, almost unable to suppress his excited emotions, suddenly started the power armor. He strode towards the outside of the Primarch's private palace. Thank you all for your support. Boom. Within the cold void, 1/3 of the Typhoon fleet and thousands of Astartes companies from various legions, led by Cypher, embarked on a distant voyage to the star sector where Lionel Johnson was located. After Cypher departed, Luo Shaw, who had originally planned to continue commanding the fleet's patrol, also received numerous intelligence reports from the native universe. Due to the limited population capacity on native Terra and the fact that food production had reached its limit, the Human Federation Council, after several years of careful discussion, finally initiated a large-scale colonization effort centered on the solar system and even the entire Milky Way galaxy. As a result, not only did the population of the native universe increase exponentially, but the number of Astartes also gradually reached around 50,000. Among them, the Carcharodons and Lamenters had the most new recruits, followed by the Blood Ravens, then the Raven Guard, while the Silver Skulls and Black Templars also began gene seed cultivation programs. However, the giant Raven Guard had the fewest in number. Even with increased cultivation, there were only about 1,500. Furthermore, apart from the two Astartes companies stationed on native Terra, the vast majority of Astartes accompanied the colonial fleets into the cold Milky Way to deal with the various alien races they might encounter. According to the suggestion of Iron Man David, the Speaker of the Human Federation, unless the alien races encountered by the colonial fleet were overly savage and xenophobic, and thus impossible to conquer or communicate with, the Astartes would not initiate genocidal slaughter. Because of the presence of the Mad Titan Thanos in the native universe, the Human Federation had to do the opposite. At least until the Mad Titan's forces were completely annihilated, the human race might become the leading species among countless alien races, thereby resisting Thanos's mad carnage of countless life-bearing planets. Additionally, thanks to the gradual initiation of the colonization effort, native Terra's large-scale starship manufacturing technology received more resources and technological support. The first Emperor-class battleship produced in the Asia War Zone was entering its final testing phase. This powerful cosmic warship, temporarily named Silent Expanse, not only integrated many of the latest technologies from the human empire and the homeworld but also truly possessed the ability for faster-than-light travel, becoming the native Terra fleet's first main combat vessel. At the same time, several other matters made Luo Shaw, who was reading a large amount of intelligence, feel immensely gratified by the rapid development of the homeworld. After preserving various geographical environments and precious species with large stasis fields, the current native Terra had completely transformed the vast majority of the planet's surface into an extremely strong war fortress, even capable of raising a planet-wide void shield during wartime, supported by countless large and medium-sized void shields. In other words, the War Planet plan, which Luo Sha and others used to casually joke about, had made significant progress. If necessary, Battle Terra was not an unimaginable prospect. In addition, AI Stark's long-cherished moon construction project had also presented a successful example. The current moon had already become a terrifying existence similar to a battle moon. Not only did it possess internal firepower far exceeding that of an ordinary combat fleet, with several planet-destroying super cannons capable of annihilating a planet with a single shot, but it had also successfully installed spatial technology that allowed for large-scale teleportation at any time. It was precisely because the battle moon's combat power was too astonishing that currently, only Fulgrim and Iron Man David among the Human Federation's high-ranking officials could deploy such military force, and both had to be present simultaneously to activate the battle moon. However, as the squinting Luo Sha read through the last few pages of the extensive intelligence, the latest information that had just arrived completely captivated his attention. Several Raven Guard deep space fleets had gradually penetrated deeper into the native universe, searching for traces of the remaining Infinity Stones. They successfully established an Astartes base belonging to humanity at a cosmic transfer station called the Land of Nihility and reached a cooperation agreement with an alien named the Collector. The Raven Guard helped the Collector acquire some of the collectibles he had long coveted, and in return, the Collector provided various complete alien technologies and the whereabouts of the Infinity Stones. Currently, the cooperation between the two sides was still pleasant. However, the Raven Guard's Shadow Captain had also prepared for a full-scale confrontation with the Collector and even countless alien races. This was because a rumor about the Power Stone was circulating throughout the Land of Nihility and the surrounding star sectors. A team of interstellar pirates called the Guardians of the Galaxy seemed to have accidentally acquired the Power Stone and were being hunted by the large forces of the powerful Kree Empire. The Power Stone has finally appeared. At this moment, Luo Sha, whose expression fluctuated, took a deep breath. He immediately issued a series of deployment orders through the communication channel to the Librarian brothers responsible for contacting the native universe. The 1,500 giant Raven Guards still on native Terra were to depart immediately to support the Raven Guard who had ventured deep into the native universe. As long as they could obtain the Power Stone, if necessary, they could unleash an exterminatus at will. However, after the order was given, Luo Sha, with a slight frown, still felt it wasn't secure enough. So, he immediately summoned the Wolf Cub, who was discussing with Reditus how to improve his vibranium arm. "Brother, I need you to go to our homeworld. The Power Stone has appeared deep in the universe, but I fear that the Astartes alone may not be enough to retrieve the Infinity Stone, as no one can guarantee that Thanos will not interfere." Luo Sha, with a low voice, spoke calmly to the wolf cub standing below the throne, without any hesitation. As soon as he finished speaking, one of his large hands slightly lifted, and a dark red reality stone was sent directly in front of the other party by tendrils of black shadow. Additionally, according to Iron Man David's secret intelligence, the Sorcerer Ancient One seems to have returned the Time Stone to Kamar Taj, where it is temporarily guarded by Doctor Strange, who inherited the title of Sorcerer Supreme. If you fear this operation isn't secure enough, you can temporarily use the Infinity Gauntlet and the 4 Infinity Stones we fully control. Even if it still can't kill Thanos, who possesses the Cosmic Cube, it can at least make you invincible. At this moment, the Wolf Cub, hearing Luo Sha's words, subconsciously grinned. As he took the Reality Stone, he casually asked Luo Sha, "Speaking of which, Primarch, aren't you afraid I'll kill too much over there and eventually attract Korn's gaze once more?" Luo Sha, slowly closing his eyes, pondered for a moment and said in a deep voice, To be honest, we are now in a situation where the more debts, the less they bother, the more lice, the less we worry. Compared to other chaos gods, I would rather it be Khorne who comes looking for trouble, because at least it's simpler and more convenient for us to deal with. We just need to kill all the chaos demons. Remember, Wolf Cub, I only want the Power Stone to be successfully recovered. Anyone who dares to stop you, no matter who they are, is our enemy. Thank you for your support. After the Wolf Cub left the Typhoon fleet with the Reality Stone and headed to his homeworld, Luo Sha, who remained within the fleet, began to lead 5 giant Raven Guards to continue the prayer support operation. However, not long after, Tyberos, who was commanding the Typhoon fleet to continue its voyage, came to find Luo Sha. My Lord Primarch, our Psykers unexpectedly received a distress signal from a nearby Astar district. If our analysis of the content is not mistaken, this seems to be information from the Steel Hands battle group. As Tyberos finished speaking, Luo Sha, who was being rapidly rinsed of green skin bloodstains by automatic servo robots, raised his hand to catch a golden throne coin that appeared out of thin air. After putting away the throne coin, he drove his vibranium power armor, which was dripping large amounts of disinfectant liquid, to Tyberos's front. I haven't encountered the Steel Hands in the previous prayer support. I thought it would take some time to find them. Speaking of which, I still need the Astartes of the Steel Hands battle group to do something for me. Directly change the direction of the entire fleet's voyage and temporarily go support them. Luo Sha's low voice slowly echoed in Tyberos's ears. The silent opponent slightly swayed his massive body. He immediately drove his Vibranium Terminator power armor and walked out of the palace. Misty Starfield, Gothic Star District, Warless Asia Starfield. As a warp gate slowly opened, more than 1,000 ships of the Typhoon fleet successively entered the real universe from the chaotic warp. The most striking metal ships, besides several battle barges and the main flagships of various Astartes companies, included the rhomboid war fortress Hero Tower. After the entire Typhoon fleet gradually completed its battle formation, a battle barge from the Shark Eater Great Company led dozens of frigates on a course deep into the Warless Asia Starfield. The mission objective of this group of Astartes was to help the Steel Hands battle group, which had sent the distress signal, deal with all wars. However, not long after, the psychic communication from the battle barge completely entered a state of intermittent malfunction. Finally, it even disappeared as if it had vanished without a trace. Facing this situation, the cautious Tyberos did not presumptuously send out other ships for support. He once again drove his Terminator power armor and found Luo Sha, who was taking a short rest. My Lord Primarch, several hours ago, a battle barge from the Shark Eater Great Company temporarily lost its trace. I suspect there's a problem here. Either the distress signal we received was itself a trap targeting us, or there is a great danger within this Yastar district that even Astartes cannot easily handle. Tyberos said in a deep voice to Luo Sha, who was sitting on the metal throne. Luo Sha, hearing the other party's words, pondered for a moment. He took a deep breath and said, "Then let the entire fleet continue to sail into the Yastar district. I don't believe that with our current number of ships and combat power, we can encounter an insurmountable great danger. I want to see what kind of enemy can swallow a Typhoon fleet composed of thousands of ships in one bite." Luo Sha's low voice repeatedly echoed throughout the palace. In fact, his words were not without reason. The current Typhoon fleet, in terms of ship numbers alone, already surpassed the number of ships Regent Gilliman could mobilize in the entire Indomitus Crusade. And this was still a portion of the ships that remained after Cypher directly took 1/3 of the fleet to support Lionel Johnson. In an instant, as Luo Sha's order gradually spread, the entire Typhoon fleet once again grandly embarked on a continuous exploration deep into the Warless Asia Starfield. Soon after, when the first Imperial world encountered by the Typhoon fleet received no signal response or psychic communication, one landing pod after another, engulfed in heavy fire, launched a continuous landing operation towards the planet's surface under the cover of several Thunderhawk transport formations. Subsequently, a large number of Astartes who stepped out of the landing pods had their first engagement with the countless Chaos cultists in the area. And Luo Sha, who remained within the fleet, also successfully obtained some data information. If there were no accidents, a Slaanesh corruption, initiated by Slaanesh and the Emperor's Children warband, was sweeping across the imperial worlds of the entire Yastar district. Because the corruption process of Slaanesh always prefers to go from top to bottom. Therefore, some ordinary people living at the lowest level of the Hive City could barely survive temporarily amidst the mad wave of chaos corruption, which was the only factor allowing Luo Sha and others to obtain intelligence information. However, through the briefly activated psychic precognition ability, Luo Sha, who vaguely saw a certain possibility in the future, chose not to save these few ordinary people. He immediately ordered the Shark Eater Great Company, whose combat style had always been comparable to the Khorne Demonkin, to purify the ordinary people present on the spot. From Luo Sha's perspective, the safety of tens of millions of ordinary crew members and ordinary servants was far more important than tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of ordinary people. Especially when the entire fleet faced chaos corruption, the Astartes would rather kill 1,000 innocent than let one escape. Not long after, the countless chaos cultists rampaging across this imperial world were successfully annihilated by the Astartes. And one massive ship after another entering low orbit launched continuous orbital bombardments over the most severely corrupted Hive cities. By the time the Typhoon fleet gradually departed, nearly half of the entire world was engulfed in a raging sea of fire. Luo Sha did not choose to reclaim it, but after a certain degree of chaos purification, he handed over the subsequent cleanup tasks to the ordinary people who would be able to survive in the future. Immediately after, the Second Imperial World slowly entered the Typhoon fleet's detection range. However, this time, the mixed communications and various psychic distress signals from the planet also allowed Luo Sha and others to successfully know that the Imperial world in front of them had not yet completely fallen and still had the possibility of being successfully reclaimed by them. Thus, Luo Sha, deciding to stretch his limbs, led thousands of Astartes from various Legion companies without hesitation. They boarded landing pods and Thunderhawk transports and launched a landing battle towards the planet's surface. It was during the brief process of this reclamation war, Luo Sha encountered the Astartes of the Steel Hands battle group for the first time and personally witnessed the insane combat style of a Raku and Clan Assault Squad. Thank you for your support. Chapter 950, Iron's Fury, Shadinus. If the Carcharodon's fighting style was like the Khorne Demonkin, full of savage violence and bloody slaughter, then the assault team from the Steel Hands battle group's Rakuin clan displayed the cold logic and combat efficiency only mechanical constructs possess. They either wielded melee weapons tightly gripped in their mechanical prosthetics, repeatedly hacking at the surging chaos cultists, or they raised heavy firepower weapons set up in their positions, continuously clearing out chaos vehicles attempting to breach the defensive line. And with the thunderous arrival of Luo Sha and a large number of Astartes, the precarious battlefield situation on this imperial world immediately underwent a drastic reversal. Countless bolter fire and whirlwind missiles crisscrossed the smoky sky, as formations of roaring Thunderhawk transports relentlessly harvested the fragile lives of chaos cultists and rebels. At this moment, Luo Sha, who had just led 5 giant Raven guards in a combat charge, slowly drove his vibranium power armor, stained with viscous blood, into the Imperial position. Several Astartes from the Steel Hands battle group stepped forward without hesitation. They offered their loyal greetings to the renowned Dark Side Regent, my lord, and the master of the Calamity Legion. Luo Sha also learned from them what had transpired in this warless Asia starfield. In fact, Luo Sha's previous conjecture was not far off. A chaos rebellion, initiated by Slaanesh's corruption, was indeed sweeping across the entire Yastar district. The Steel Hands battle group had dispatched an Astartes company composed of 5 clans, leading hundreds of thousands of mortal warriors to suppress the rebellion and reclaim the territory. Initially, the entire plan proceeded smoothly. Due to the recent outbreak of chaos rebellions in various worlds, the highly efficient Steel Hands clan even managed to reclaim nearly 72% of the area. However, perhaps the Astartes of the Steel Hands battle group were inadvertently affected by chaos, or perhaps the clan's command hierarchy truly knew of more unknown hidden dangers. In any case, their extremely efficient combat only led to countless complaints from the Astra Militarum's mortal troops. Ultimately, this forcibly suppressed rebellious sentiment was gradually exploited by Slaanesh demons, leading to a dramatic reversal in the Steel Hands battle group's war situation. By the time everyone focused on reclaiming Shadinus, the capital planet of the warless Asia starfield, hundreds of thousands of Astra Militarum troops, discontent with the Steel Hands battle group, engaged in incredibly fierce combat clashes with Astartes from different clans, under the cover of a warp storm. Even though the Astartes from the Steel Hands could fight 100, or even 1,000, the Astra Militarum's countless heavy firepower vehicles gradually dispersed the Astartes. Even by the time the warp storm ended, the Rakuan clan's assault team in front of Luo Sha discovered that they had arrived inside an imperial world that had not yet fallen. At this point, Luo Sha, having understood everything, had no emotional fluctuations regarding the Steel Hands battle group's unexpected encounter. To some extent, Slaanesh's corrupting influence could be said to have played a significant role. However, the Steel Hands battle group's usual attitude towards the Astra Militarum troops likely also played a decisive factor. The Astartes only considered combat efficiency, forgetting that mortal warriors are not mechanical constructs but living flesh and blood. Not long after, Luo Sha's Astartes, with the assistance of orbital fire, successfully slaughtered all the chaos cultists and rebels on this imperial world, reclaiming the entire planet. The assault team from the Rakuan clan also temporarily joined Luo Sha's forces and boarded the Calamity Legion's Typhoon fleet. Next, Luo Sha, as a Primarch, unhesitatingly took over the rebellion suppression mission belonging to the Steel Hands battle group. He intended to find the Steel Hands Astartes, who had been completely scattered by the warp storm, across various imperial worlds, until the entire Yastar district was reclaimed. Thus, the vast Calamity Legion Typhoon fleet swiftly moved towards the next imperial world. Landing pods, wrapped in heavy fire, and Thunderhawk transport formations continuously deployed countless Astartes onto the planet's surface. Even if more rebels and chaos cultists attempted to use the sturdy fortresses on the surface to delay the Astartes' advance, orbital bombardment from ships in low orbit mercilessly incinerated countless traitors. After this entire imperial world was successfully reclaimed by Luo Sha once again, a Rakuan clan dreadnought veteran, temporarily without engine power, was also discovered by everyone beneath the shattered corpses of countless chaos cultists. Fortunately, he still showed some signs of life and was successfully rescued by the Astartes into the Calamity Legion's Typhoon fleet. And as time continued to pass, in the Imperial worlds the Calamity Legion's Typhoon fleet encountered afterwards, in addition to numerous chaos cultists and even rebels, scattered Slaanesh demons also began to appear. This indicated that the chaos corruption across the entire Yastar district was gradually worsening, and if the delay continued, the number of chaos demons would likely increase. However, Luo Sha did not order the large fleet to accelerate the pace of reclaiming the Imperial worlds. He still proceeded methodically, going to each Imperial world, successfully reclaiming the planet, and then searching for more Steel Hands Astartes. Not long after, on an Imperial world that was essentially beyond saving. While purifying chaos corruption, Luo Sha's Astartes company unexpectedly rescued several struggling Steel Hands librarian units. One of them, a librarian brothers who introduced himself as Chief Librarian to Hera, immediately requested to meet the Primarch after learning that the Dark Side Regent, my lord, was within the Typhoon fleet. So Luo Sha received this chief librarian in his private palace. My lord Primarch, thank you for your generous assistance to the Steel Hands, but the situation we face may be more serious than imagined. Before we were caught in the warp storm, there were already significant warp fluctuations on Shadinus, the capital of the warless Asia starfield, and the possibility of a warp gate forming there is constantly increasing. I still believe that Avian, the supreme commander of this campaign, is still leading the remaining forces in a final resistance on Shadinus. I want to ask you to help us, the Steel Hands, prevent the appearance of the warp gate. At this moment, Chief Librarian Tahara's low voice slowly echoed in Luo Shah's ears. And after Luo Shah, with narrowed eyes, gazed at him for a few moments. He then slowly issued the command to Tiberos and the others for the entire Calamity Legion's Typhoon fleet to change its direction of advance. Thank you for your support. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.